For another chance to win £20,000 in tax-free cash, text PRIZE to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB05 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 31st of May. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
GB News is Britain's election channel.
And when the big stories break, we're tackling them on Britain's newsroom. When we disagree, and we disagree a lot, it's even livelier than normal.
We don't disagree that much.
We do. His comedy, though, is revolting. I knew her, unlike you. That explains Beverly Turner's temperament.
It's a bit frothy in here, isn't it?
You'll have one of me one day.
Yeah, for dartball practice. Britain's newsroom on GB News. Weekdays, 9:30 a.m.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
We're GB News, and we come from a proud tradition of British journalism.
That's why I'm so excited to be here. It's something so new.
The first news channel to be launched in Britain in over 30 years.
Launched to represent the views of the British people.
To go where other broadcasters refuse to go.
How did you find out about the story in the first place?
Launched with one aim.
To be the fearless champion of Britain.
It's an absolutely fantastic atmosphere here.
This is GB News. The People's
Channel. GB News, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
A very good afternoon to you. It's 3 p.m. and welcome to the Martin Daubney Show on GB News. We're broadcasting live from the heart of Westminster, all across the UK. Today, will there be an early general election? Well, rumours of an early snap election, perhaps as soon as July, are mounting, reaching fever pitch here in Westminster. With inflation falling, visa numbers down, and 15 EU countries following Rishi Sunak's lead on Rwanda. Are the Tories right to go to the polls early? Or would they be turkeys voting for Christmas? Next up, law and out of order. An astonishing leaks memo from the National Police Chiefs Council has recommended pausing non-priority arrests and suspend operations that may trigger large numbers of arrests, such as riots or protests, allegedly because now jails are full to bursting point. Well, I'll be joined by a top cop who says that they'll refuse to follow any such orders. And today, at the Post Office inquiry, the shamed former chief, Paula Venables, wept as she gave evidence with a sensational allegation that she knew. We'll cross live for all of the latest. And on visa numbers, data released on visas granted for foreigners to come to Britain has been a mixed bag for the Tories today. On the upside, overall applications are 25% down, with student-dependent visas down by 79%. But skilled worker visas have soared by 41%. Will we ever take back control of our borders? That's all coming in the next action-packed hour. Welcome to the air. Welcome to the show. There's something in the air in Downing Street. There's fizzing rumours of a snap early general election. We'll have all of the analysis. We've got reporters in Westminster at Downing Street in the studio. The brilliant analysis you've come to expect from us. Brace yourselves. We've got one heck of a show coming up. Get stuck in. Is it the right thing to do? Send your views. gbnews.com/you'll say should the Tories go to the poll? Get over and done with. Do they have a sniff have a chance of even winning, or will they be doomed if they go early? Let me know your thoughts, but before all of that, it's your headlines and it's Sam Francis.
Martin, thank you very much, and good afternoon to you. It's 2 minutes past 3. The top story this afternoon: the Prime Minister has hailed a fall in inflation as a major moment for the UK economy. Driven by lower gas and electricity prices, the latest figures show that inflation dropped to 2.3% in April for the first time in nearly 3 years. It's fueled speculation of a summer general election. But when urged to get on with it and call a vote during the Prime Minister's questions this afternoon, Rishi Sunak repeated his intentions, sticking to what he's previously said.
Spoiler alert, there is going to be a general election in the second half of this year, and at that moment the British people will in fact see the truth about the honourable gentleman opposite me, because that will be the choice at the next election, Mr. Speaker. A party that is not able to say to the country what they would do, a party that would put at risk our hard-earned economic stability, or the Conservatives that are delivering a secure future for our United Kingdom.
Following those figures out today, Labour's Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves has said there's no reason for the government to be celebrating.
This is about more than lines on a graph. It's about family finances. And the truth is, after 14 years of Conservative government, working families and pensioners are still worse off. And the truth is, I'm much more ambitious for the country than Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt seem to be.
Well, we've been speaking to people in Birmingham today, and they say they're still struggling to make ends meet despite today's inflation figures.
I think it's propaganda. Go in the shops and the prices, they're either going up or you're getting less for your money. So I'm not seeing where the inflation is actually hitting.
We can do a lot better, can't we, as people? We are feeling the pinch at the moment, aren't we? We all are.
I think the prices have increased so much over the past 24 months that the fact that they're slowing down is a good thing, but ultimately people's disposable income just isn't there.
In other news, the former post office boss at the centre of the Horizon IT scandal has admitted making mistakes during her time in charge during tearful evidence at the Horizon inquiry. Paula Venables apologised for telling MPs the business was successful in every court case against sub-postmasters. Live pictures here coming to us from central London, where that inquiry is taking place, the first of 3 days that Paula Venables will be giving evidence there. She has insisted she didn't know about the Horizon system when she joined and said that no one told her of any bugs. She's also denied any conspiracy to cover up the scandal.
I fully accept now that the post office, the post office knew that. I completely accepted. Personally, I didn't know that, and I'm incredibly sorry that that happened to those people and to so many others.
Speaking outside the inquiry, sub-postmaster Christopher Head says he has little sympathy.
You can't rewrite history. Is that she wanted to protect the post office brand at all costs. That was what she did, and we can see that that's what has happened.
Conservative MP Craig Mackinlay has made his first appearance in Parliament 8 months after contracting sepsis. Well, he received that standing ovation as he entered the Commons this afternoon. The member for South Thanet, who had extreme surgery to remove both his hands and feet, was given just a 5% chance of survival after being put in a coma for 16 days in September. Police say the deaths of 2 women whose bodies were found at a property in Nottingham don't appear to be suspicious. Officers were called to an address after concerns were raised about their welfare. It's believed their bodies may have been in the property for some time before being discovered. Neighbours in the Radford area believe they're being failed by local authorities.
It's really shocked me. I've just come out on the Wednesday market doing what I've got to do, you know what I mean, and then find out the 2 women have lost their lives. And of course it's upsetting. It's like I wouldn't want, you know, if you've seen some kid getting knocked out in the street, you wouldn't want that. You don't want it from your area. Now everyone's going to be on alert now. And all these people are just sitting back, oh, we've done this check, we didn't do that check. But they've left it too late. People are dying.
Israel has recalled its ambassadors from Ireland after it officially recognised Palestine today as an independent state. In coordinated announcements with Norway and Spain, the Irish Premier said his country was taking that decision for freedom and for justice. Israel's foreign ministry has warned, though, on social media that the move would fuel extremism and instability. But Simon Harris says it is the only pathway to peace.
Today, Ireland, Norway and Spain are announcing that we recognise the state of Palestine. Each of us will now undertake whatever national steps are necessary to give effect to that decision.
And finally, the mother of a Manchester Arena bombing victim has completed a 200-mile walk to Downing Street. Martin Hett's mum, Figan Murray, set off from the spot where he was killed 15 days ago. She's delivered a letter to the Prime Minister this afternoon demanding tougher anti-terror legislation. That's on the 7th anniversary of the attack. For the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts. You can scan the code there on your screen or go to our website, gbnews.com/alerts. Now, though, it's back to Martin.
Thank you, Sam. Now, what a show. Let's get stuck in. Is Rishi Sunak about to call a snap general election? Well, it was announced this morning that inflation is now at its lowest level in 3 years, and new figures have revealed that immigration is also beginning to come down, albeit slightly, with the number of foreign nationals moving to the UK to work and study falling by 25%. Now, this has led many people to say that the Conservative Party's fortunes are finally beginning to turn a corner. So the big question is now the time for the Prime Minister to call the nation to the polls? Well, we can now cross live to Downing Street and speak to GB News' political correspondent, Catherine Forster. Catherine, welcome to the show. Yesterday, you were with the Prime Minister in Vienna. Today, the Prime Minister, seemingly the rumour mill throwing the cat amongst the pigeons. What's the latest from Downing Street?
Yes, good afternoon, Martin. Well, if you'd asked me yesterday or the day before, and I was with the Prime Minister in Vienna, if he was about to call a general election on his return, I would have said absolutely not. I still expect it will be November. If you'd asked me when I got up this morning, I would have said the same. But I have to say, the rumour mill here in Westminster is absolutely crazy, and we're trying to piece together a jigsaw. We don't have a full picture, of course, but pieces do seem to be falling into place, and it does seem we know something big is happening today. We're not quite sure what, but it does seem very possible that the Prime Minister might be about to call an election for July the 4th. Let me tell you what we know. He was asked in Prime Minister's questions if he could confirm this rumour. He laughed and he said, as he's always said, in the second half of the year. So basic maths can tell us that July is the first month of the second half of the year. So that told us nothing. We know there's a cabinet meeting at 4:15 this afternoon. Now, again, that's nothing unusual because it was postponed because he was in Austria yesterday. So that's nothing in itself. What is really odd and suggests that something big is afoot is the fact that Lord Cameron, the Foreign Secretary, was in Albania, but he is flying back early to be at this cabinet meeting. Also, the Defence Secretary, Grant Shapps, was due to go on a trip, and he's now delayed that a little bit also to make that meeting. Now, that's unusual because a normal cabinet meeting, if people are away, they are away. It's really no big deal. Also, the Chancellor was due to appear on ITV tonight. That has also been cancelled. So what is going on? We won't have very long to find out. Certainly, there's plenty of people around Westminster that think the Prime Minister is going to call a general election. Of course, a reshuffle is also possible, though David Cameron coming back from Albania wouldn't seem to me to be necessary for a reshuffle. It's also possible that he could announce a date, say for September or October. He could just say, I'm setting the date now and it's in the autumn. I wonder why he would do that, though, because that's going to be quite helpful to Labour. and other parties with their planning. Labour, for their part, have said again today, this lunchtime, that they are ready, and basically their message is bring it on.
OK, Catherine Forster, excellent. Thank you for that update from Downing Street. We'll cross back to you live throughout the show for more as it breaks. Let's get back to the studio now for the analysis of this. I'm joined by GB News' political correspondent Olivia Utley and GB News' senior political commentator Nigel Nelson. Nigel, let's start with you. Why would this happen? I mean, the Conservative Party are 20 points behind. They have been for 10 consecutive weeks. That's never happened in living memory. All the indicators point to the Conservatives getting a trouncing. Why would they call an early general election? Help me make some sense of this.
Well, that's what's baffling us all, by the way. Public opinion is not like a speedboat. It's like an oil tanker, and it takes a long time to turn around. So if there's good news on the horizon, he just has a chance of being able to turn it round about November. So the thinking up until this morning in Parliament was he'd probably launch a general election on the back of the party conference in October. November the 14th then becomes the likely date. Then the fevered speculation goes on about an election date. I mean, MPs were asking each other, what do you think? What have you heard? What's going on? I run into a couple of special advisors on my way over here. Now, they were going to a meeting that was held at 2 o'clock. That was an unusual meeting. These were two SPADs outside their normal comfort zones because they were away from their departments. I then saw one of them after the meeting and said, come on, what is going on? All he did was grunt at me. These are people who would normally give you an indication saying, look, calm down, everybody, that nothing's actually happening. Nobody's doing that. So I think that Catherine's absolutely right. Something is going on. What we don't really know is what that something is.
OK, Olivia, there are some short-term possible benefits to Rishi Sunak. Yesterday, he was in Vienna. 15 EU countries are set to follow Rishi's lead on Rwanda. Some good news on the economy. Inflation down to 2.3%, almost hitting that 2% target. There's some good news in the visa numbers, some benefits there. But that's not enough to overcome the headwind, is it, of the Conservative Party being behind? Is there a benefit in simply acting with bravado, simply acting confidence? Does that rub off on the electorate?
Well, as Nigel said, I mean, the problem is that public opinion is very, very slow to move. Yes, there are some indications that things are going in the right direction, but people aren't going to be feeling any better off for quite a long time to come. Yes, inflation's down at 2.3%, but interest rates haven't fallen yet. They're still at 5.25%, still at a 17-year high. They're not likely to fall at the next Bank of England meeting in June. And while those interest rates remain so high, people are still going to be in mortgage hell. By later this year, it's possible, it's likely, in fact, that interest rates will have gone down, that inflation will have gone down further, and as a result, the Bank of England will feel that they're able to cut interest rates. If that happens, that mortgage hell will start to ease a little bit. People on tracker mortgages will be starting to pay a little bit less. We're already seeing energy prices going down a little bit. Surely, over the course of this year, energy prices would continue to go down as we get a hold of what's going on in Russia and Ukraine and start to come to terms with it and work out how to work around it. We also have that Rwanda scheme. The Rwanda scheme has now gone through Parliament, but the flights aren't yet off the ground. Rishi Sunak said he was going to stop the boats. Until people start seeing the dividends of that Rwanda scheme, Rishi Sunak can't possibly say that he's managed to stop the boats. All of that said, there are a couple of reasons why, and it does seem increasingly likely, Rishi Sunak could call a general election. There could be some logic in the idea that just sort of acting with bravado, showing kind of bravery, the idea that it's sort of unlikely that things are going to get better, why not rip off the plaster? And one very good argument is that over the course of the summer, we normally see small boat arrivals go up. In the warmer months, it's much easier for people to cross the channel. And that starts in about June, July, and carries on all the way till October, when the sea's a little bit warmer. If you have sort of a 4-month period of small boat crossings getting higher and higher and higher, that looks terrible for the Prime Minister. So I suppose there is an argument on those grounds alone to simply pull off the plaster in early July before those summer crossings have really started in earnest.
OK, Olivia, Nigel, stick with us. We are the People's Channel, of course. We've been out and about today asking the great British public what they felt about an early election.
No doubt we need change. Things aren't working.
Things are broken, people are suffering. Not that I think that the opposition would do an increasingly better job, but I think they would do a better job than the current government.
Absolutely.
And if the one did come, would you be comfortable saying what way you would fall on?
No, I'll keep that to myself.
That's all right. There's definitely an age barrier. So tell me this then: who is least deserving of your vote?
Tories. Absolutely, Tories.
Any reason?
Look at the country. Look at the state we're in. That's pretty much all you really need to say, isn't it?
Do you think we should have an early snap election?
No.
No. Are you quite happy? Any idea if there was one, kind of what kind of side you would fall on?
I think we need a wee bit of change and a wee bit in power and stuff like that. Tories, and my weight would go for Labour, you know what I mean? I was an SNP supporter for years and that during the referendum and stuff like that, but just now, you know what I mean, I just think, you know what I mean, Labour. The more realistic kind of Keir Starmer, I know he can be a wee bit, I'm not going to say the word, but I think it's just time for change and that, so it'd be good, you know what I mean, me personally anyway.
And that's the voters in Glasgow. The lady there fell just shy of doing a Brenda from Bristol, didn't she? And said, oh, God,
another one.
But it seems to be taking everybody by surprise, this, Nige.
Yeah, I mean, the trouble is we have been getting these sort of these rumours coming around on a weekly basis. You can't pick up a newspaper without seeing the latest one being mentioned. This does feel materially different, which is why we got so excited. Now, you can say that this is business as usual, that the cabinet meeting had to be held today because the Prime Minister was away yesterday. He couldn't do it this morning because he was prepping for PMQs, so he had to do it this afternoon. But it does feel a bit different. If the Tories have found a way to actually, that they think they can trounce Labour, and one example might be that some of their attack lines have been hitting home. If they've been secretly drawing up a plan to do that, possibly they think going now is a good time. If I was an advisor at the Tory party, I would say don't go now.
Okay, and Olivia, quickly, you have a patriotic theory, don't you, as to why there could be a benefit in going early?
Well, I do, because the date of the 4th of July is just at the start of the Euros.
Yeah.
I think right early on in the Euros, we can assume that England will still be doing quite well. And A, that will mean that there'll be much less coverage of the general election. All of the headlines will be taken up by news of the Euros. That could favour Rishi Sunak because it could mean a low turnout. Also, if there is a sort of feel-good feeling in the country, as hopefully we can expect, that usually tends to favour the incumbent. That might be good for Rishi too.
Then I can say it's Gareth Southgate what won it. Nigel Nelson, Olivia Utley, superb start to the show. Thank you very much. Of course, we'll have loads more on that throughout the rest of the show as our moles and Downing Street feed us more information. Now, in what many will say is yet another example of Britain's broken justice system, police are being told to make fewer arrests due to a lack of space in our prisons. Chief constables are also being advised to suspend any operations that may trigger a large number of arrests until there is enough cell capacity. Well, this, to me, seems like absolute madness, but let's get the thoughts of the former Metropolitan Police Detective Superintendent. I'm joined now on screen. Welcome to the show. So tell me, when you see things like this, you've often been on the show and you said back in your day you used to arrest people routinely. Now police already don't seem to have much of an appetite for arrest. But when you hear, Kev, that the top brass are saying make less arrests, how does that make you feel?
Well, I think despair is the wrong word, but I'm certainly moving in that direction. I mean, for example, police last year made 670,000 arrests. That's 50% of what they made 14 years ago in 2010. And the streets have certainly not got better. What concerns me about this is it's just the weak, vacillating way the Police Chief Council have just rolled over. This is all the police chiefs, if you like, representative body, and said, oh, we'll arrest stuff that's not urgent. Well, quite frankly, if a person needs to be arrested, there is a good reason behind it, because they're a burglar or they're wanted for stealing someone's bicycle or their car or their phone. It's not something you put off, because the actual Police and Criminal Evidence Act, Code G, says you need to arrest to get on and deal with the matter. I frankly despair. And when I look at government's latest plans to change the sentencing guidelines, which are anyone who gets a sentence of less than 12 months, that should be presumed that it should be suspended. You know, as a member of the public, I despair, and as a former police officer, I feel deeply, deeply sorry for the police constables and detective constables who have to put up with the continual criticism and brickbats of us, the disappointed public. It's quite simply not the police's fault that they don't turn up for burglaries or the streets are out of control. If you're not able to lock people up because there's no prison capacity, your senior leadership is giving up. And a classic is a case that's just gone through the courts, where an officer who detained someone because it was suspected that she'd not paid a fare on the bus because she refused to produce proof of that to a bus inspector. A magistrate, a district judge, has just convicted him of assault. The message is, if you're doing your job, don't bother, because you'll end up in front of the courts. You know, I've just been said...
Kevin, can I just interject, please? Kevin, let's interject. I need to ask you another question, Kevin Hurley. The thing that I found very, very alarming about this was don't go to places, scenarios where there could be a large number of arrests. We're, of course, talking about riots or even all these weekly pro-Palestine protests. Might this explain why they've been soft-soaping those protesters? They haven't got enough nicks to put them in.
Well, I don't think they've gone that far on that basis. But what concerns me more than that is there are hundreds of council estates up and down the country with rowdy groups of yobs who control those estates, make the lives of ordinary, decent working people an absolute misery. And you're effectively saying, don't go there, don't have a confrontation with them, don't rule the streets, don't show the public you're there to protect them, because you might have to arrest people. Quite honestly, I'm appalled not only at what I see coming out from senior police leaders, but also I'm appalled about the fact the government have let this, if you like, perfect storm of the courts being overwhelmed, probation and prisons being overwhelmed, and then all the time it's the poor old coppers on the beat who get blamed by everybody. I'm simply appalled at what this government has allowed to happen to law and order, and they're supposed to be the party that protects them. Margaret Thatcher said the first duty of the government is to protect the citizens when they go about their lawful business.
Yeah,
and when
many
people
will agree
have
with
to
that.
put up...
Kevin Hurley, I'm afraid we simply have to leave it there. We could talk all day, but we've ran out of time. Thanks for joining us, Kevin Hurley. Always a delight to have you on the show. We'll have lots more on that story, of course, throughout the show. And there's plenty of coverage on our website, gbnews.com. You've helped to make it the fastest-growing national news website in the country, so thank you very much. Now, coming up, as inflation falls to the lowest level in nearly 3 years, could the recovering economy boost Sunak at the possible polls? I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
He's meeting his father, the King, for just the second time since his father's cancer diagnosis. Harry's going to an Invictus Games gig at St Paul's on Wednesday, and his father is hosting a garden party at Buckingham Palace. Once they're all said and done, about 7 p.m, they are going to meet, apparently.
Yeah,
but
wonderful.
crucially not the Princess of Wales.
Well, I think it's a wonderful story, and obviously you would. If you're visiting the country, you haven't seen your dad and he's ill with cancer, of course you'd go grab a Costa. I can't wait to see the pictures of them in Costa together, just having a little catch-up.
Do you know they might embrace?
I would hope so, but...
Do you know, I think it's really important that life's too short not to have a relationship with your family. I know too many people that aren't speaking, or they've fallen out because of money or whatever, and we're only on this earth for a very short time, and what a shame not to have a relationship with your own
haven't they?
son.
I mean, it's the trust issue that is really the problem here, and straight after this they're going to be heading off to Nigeria, and they're still involved in all of these sort of like commercial and media activities. If you don't have that trust there with your family, and you're responsible for breaking that trust down, it's not really, it's sort of on you, isn't it?
It's still mendable, though, I think. And we've all got people in our family that maybe we wouldn't trust with our bank details or something like that. So they can just not... You know, Charles shouldn't be going to Harry, guess what, you can't tell anyone. He's like, that's not what they're going to talk about, are they? They're not going to tell him anything.
The king is his father, but it's different, isn't it, if it's your brother, it's your sibling, whereas a father's probably perhaps more likely to be forgiving and to be wanting to sort of reunite. Do you think maybe it's going to be harder for him to mend that relationship with William and Catherine?
I think it's really, really hard. I mean, I can't see how they can... But they need to get in a room together. They need to speak. The only way that you are going to break down barriers when it comes to relationships is by facing it and speaking about it.
You say life's too short, but some would say, well, that's the perfect reason not to tolerate any nonsense.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News with Dubes & Co from 6, followed by Farage at 7. At 8, Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg addresses the state of the nation. And at 9, join Patrick Christie's Tonight, followed by Headliners at 11. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Your time is 3:28. I'm Martin Daubney. This is GB News. Now, inflation has fallen to 2.3%, its lowest level since 2021. The Prime Minister says the economy is now turning a corner, but Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves says people are still worse off.
Well, despite the numbers coming down today, the truth is, compared to 3 years ago, food prices are 30% higher, energy bills are higher, and that's had a real toll on family finances, who are still struggling after 14 years of Conservative chaos. The mini-budget.
Well, joining me in the studio is the economist and business commentator Justin Urquhart-Stewart. Justin, always a delight to see those red braces hove into view. I can feel my mood lift on a serious point. 2.3%, getting towards a target of 2%. But is it enough for people to notice any difference?
Yeah, they know the numbers changed, but do they actually feel better? And how do you feel better? By having more money in your pocket, feeling, actually, I'm not so worse off after all. And how do you do that? Well, you have to put more money in their pocket, and inflation doesn't really do that. It's good news, but not enough really to get people excited. The way you do that, particularly for most of the British population, those who are earning, is actually through mortgages and borrowing. Hit interest rates. After all, interest rates should have already come down because they originally were put up for, to control consumer spending. Well, there wasn't a consumer boom, so they could afford to bring them down. 0.25%, 0.5% for over 1 million people this year. If they're changing your fixed-rate mortgage, that makes a tangible difference. Now, if a government's doing that, you're putting more money in my pockets, more chance of getting my vote.
Do you think that inflation coming down to this target of 2%, that was the Bank of England's target, would it make them a bit more likely to loosen the grip and give homeowners that boost by cutting that rate?
Well, certainly it's encouraging for them. But the trouble is, the Bank of England, when it says it's independent, actually, of course, it's very dependent upon who the members of the committee are, and particularly the non-Bank of England members, and they all have to be approved by the Treasury anyway. So I want to slightly question just how independent it is. But that's slightly beside the point. The issue is it gives them more reason to say, get the economy moving again. They won't have so much risk by cutting interest rates this time because inflation is coming down, and we can see that around the world. So no one would really criticise them for that. If I were a government, I'd be saying, push harder, have a quarter now, have a quarter at the next one. Now you're seeing some tangible benefits coming through.
And we are seeing top Conservatives, Jacob Rees-Mogg et al., put in those demands to the Bank of England. Now's the time to do it. Look, we've done our bit, now you do yours. But that would hand the Conservatives an election boost, wouldn't it? Like, wow, inflation is down and your mortgage is down. So that rate in itself, that cut, could be very political.
It would be very political. But on the other hand, if I was, I'm not a politician, but as a politician saying, how do I win this? I get people to support my target. How do I do that? By giving them more money. Give them more money, make for those people who are earning with mortgages tangibly better off. Over the past 2 years, they have been tangibly worse off. So inflation coming down, that's OK. But make my mortgage cheaper, make access to the property market easier. There's a lot you can do there in the short term to make people feel better.
And 2.3%, in general, inflation has been put down to falling energy costs, but just people are still getting hammered at the till when they go grocery shopping, when they buy the everyday bits and bobs. That isn't getting any cheaper.
No, it's not. And the trouble is that's not under the control of the politicians at all, so don't try and hang your hat on prices are getting cheaper. They don't feel cheaper. And remember, the confidence is built up over time. Unfortunately, it's lost like popping a balloon. Unfortunately, to actually then inflate a balloon takes a long time to actually huff and puff and make it bigger. They haven't got that time. So what are you going to do in its place? Short term, find access to put more money in their pocket, and that lies with interest rates.
Justin, always an absolute delight to have you in the studio. Thank you very much for joining us. Of course, that's Justin Stewart, the legend. Thank you very much. There's lots more still to come between now and 4 o'clock, including student family visa applications are down almost 80%. And with all eyes on the net migration figures, they, of course, are due out tomorrow. Could this be Rishi Sunak's chance to salvage his premiership? But first, it's your news headlines, and it's Sophia Wensler.
Martin, thank you. It's 3:32. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. First, to some breaking news from Manchester Crown Court, where nursery worker Kate Ruffley has been sentenced to 14 years in prison for the manslaughter of a 9-month-old baby. She strapped Genevieve Meehan face down on a beanbag for more than an hour and a half at Tiny Toes Nursery in Stockport in May 2022. The 37-year-old then failed to check on the distressed child and later found she was unresponsive. The Prime Minister has hailed a fall in inflation as a major moment for the UK economy. Driven by lower gas and electricity prices, the latest figures show inflation dropped to 2.3% in April for the first time in nearly 3 years. It's fuelled speculation of a summer general election. When asked about when he'll call the vote during Prime Minister's questions, Rishi Sunak repeated his intentions, sticking to what he's previously said.
Spoiler alert, there is going to be a general election in the second half of this year, and at that moment the British people will in fact see the truth about the honourable gentleman opposite me, because that will be the choice at the next election, Mr. Speaker. A party that is not able to say to the country what they would do, a party that would put at risk our hard-earned economic stability, or the Conservatives that are delivering a secure future for our United Kingdom.
Former Post Office boss Paula Venables admits she made mistakes over the Horizon IT scandal, but denies there was a conspiracy to cover up failures. She's broken down a number of times during her first of 3 days of giving evidence to the inquiry. The ordained priest also apologised for telling MPs in 2012 that sub-postmasters had been tempted to put their hands in the till. And Conservative MP Craig Mackinlay has made his first appearance in Parliament 8 months after contracting sepsis. He was applauded in the Commons and given a standing ovation. He's had both hands and feet amputated after developing sepsis in September and was given a 5% chance of survival. And for the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Cheers Britannia Wine Club proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
And here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2734 and 1.1750 euros. The price of gold is £1,880 and 52 pence per ounce. And the FTSE 100's at 8,363 points.
Cheers Britannia Wine Club proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, I'm John Vincent. Queues on the M6 northbound in Staffordshire. 2 lanes closed for emergency repairs between junction 12 Gailey and 13 for Stafford South. Queues on the M62 westbound in West Yorkshire. There's a lane closed for emergency bridge repairs between junction 22 Rishruthmore and 21 for Milnrow. Long delays on the M1 northbound in Derbyshire. 2 lanes closed for emergency repairs between junction 30 Worksop and 31 for Sheffield. Long delays on the M5 northbound in the West Midlands. The exit slip road to the M6 M6 northbound is closed for emergency resurfacing repairs. Queues on the M1 northbound in Hertfordshire. It's all due to a lane closure for an accident at junction 6 for North Watford. And there's queuing traffic on the M25 QE2 bridge clockwise. That's due to a police incident at junction 31 for Lakeside. And that's the latest traffic and travel news.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
So the UK's most popular baby names have been revealed, with Noah and Olivia again topping the annual list. In at number 2 is Mohammed for boys. List is on the screen here. Number 3 for boys is George. Then it goes Olivia. Then it's Leo, Arthur, and so on. And for girls, so Olivia is number 1. Then Amelia, Isla, Ava, Lily, Ivy, Freya. There we go. Any of those names take your pick? Where's Dawn, by the way?
Well, yeah, there's on the Telegraph website, right, there's a really good way linked into this where you can actually put your name into the search engine, and these are names from 2022, by the way, and it tells you how common your name was. And I did put Dawn in. It's never been that popular. Can't think why. And there were only 5 babies named Dawn in 2022.
Really? That's surprising.
It's not a full confession here, right? My middle name, Mum, I hate you, is Maureen. Why is everyone laughing? My middle name is Maureen, which is a good old-fashioned East End name, and that has completely died out. There were no babies named Maureen.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Names like Keith, for example, Peter. Would you call a baby these days Keith or Ian? Baby Ian?
Without a doubt. I feel like I'm in a persecuted minority, you see, because later on, when I'm watching the boxing with Terry, Steve, Mick, Phil and Kev, right, and Peter, there are no such names featuring in this list. We are dying out. Our names will soon be gone forever, and I feel victimised by it.
Likewise, I should think we should start a campaign group and go on a protest march through London.
Cans, what do you make about Mohammed being number 2 for boys' names?
You know, I'm not going to comment on people. You know, they're going to call what they want to call. What I find interesting is people that do double barrel because they can't decide, and you know, a lot of people do that, and that's a bit difficult because I think you should just pick a name. You know.
I'll tell you names that are falling down the list though: Harry and Meghan.
Welcome back. Your time is 3:38. I'm Martin Daubney and this is GB News. Now, any move towards an election in early July could be timed to coincide with the first flights to Rwanda. And the current schedule suggests that those first asylum flights, seekers flights, will take off at the beginning of July. Well, holding an election then would also offer the key advantage of not having to wait to see whether the Rwanda gamble has actually proved to be the deterrent. Rishi Sunak is convinced that it will be. Well, to discuss this, I'm now joined by GB News' Home and Security Editor, Mark White. Mark, fascinating prospect there, something you've been saying for a long time, because, of course, that crucial summer period is when the small boat numbers tend to go through the roof. So going earlier to the polls could, in that sense, stop the bad headlines.
Absolutely right. This is fascinating, isn't it? Because we are heading to that period in late July, August, September, when you will get many boats coming across the English Channel. Now, that's the last thing that the government would necessarily want to do, is to go to the public at the end of the summer with a bumper period of boats coming across. And also, of course, if the Rwanda flights take off and it doesn't prove to be a deterrent, then you're looking at a multi-million-pound failure there. The key advantage with going a bit earlier is that the schedule would appear to be pretty much on track for the first flight or two to leave in early July, just about the time you're going to the polls, if they decide that the 4th of July or around that period is the time they want to go to the polls. You get the first flights off, you can then say to the public, look, we have made good on our promise, a hard-fought promise to finally get these flights off the ground. Stick with us, because you will see there will be a deterrent in the weeks and months ahead. However, if Labour get in, this will be the message that the Conservatives would no doubt trumpet. If Labour get in, they are they've said themselves, going to immediately reverse the Rwanda process, just at a time when other governments across Europe are looking very seriously at the issue of third-party safe countries to send asylum seekers to. So I think this, Martin, potentially is a really strong area that the government might be able to try to tackle Labour on, where they don't have to prove that Rwanda has been a success. They just need to get those first few flights off the ground.
And Mark, to be fair to you, you've absolutely been calling that all along. You've been saying that all along. Can I talk to you about the visa numbers that came out today? A mixed bag for Rishi Sunak, but again, can he claim amidst this that there is some signs that he's taken back control of some of the visa categories, in particular student visas?
Yeah, I think the mood music here is increasingly optimistic for the government, because remember, what you've got are a number of policy changes which are having an impact demonstrably on the number of student visas and dependents coming across. So from the beginning of the year, all but a few students would now be allowed to take their dependents over with them to study. And that has shown a remarkable 79% decrease in the number of dependents who are applying for visas in the first 4 months of this year. And actually, overall student numbers are down as well. And also, when you look at the issue around the visas for skilled visas for those working in the health and care sector, that's also coming down because, again, just in April there was a new policy to stop dependents coming through, so to stop dependents of those working in the care sector being able to apply and come here to the UK as well. So that's showing a drop. And then you've also, on top of that, Martin, got the situation where with skilled visas, they've upped the threshold from, I think it's about £26,000 to £38,000 to qualify for a skilled visa. That has not yet manifested in terms of numbers, because it only started on the 4th of April. But again, in the next month or two, they should be able to point to a significant decrease in the numbers coming on that route.
And Mark, skilled worker visas 41% up. However, and of course, all eyes on tomorrow, the net migration figures expected to land. Do we have any inkling, Mark, of the direction of travel of those? It can't be higher than 745,000 last year, can it?
I'm not sure it will be higher, but it will be high. There is no doubt about it. And interestingly, Martin, the government brought forward the Home Office figures today. They normally come out in tandem with the net migration figures from the Office for National Statistics. But the government brought them forward today because they want to decouple their figures from the ONS figures, because they say the ONS figures don't give a true reflection of the direction of travel we're at the moment, because they only go up to December of last year. And they say clearly, by pointing to the figures for the first 4 months of this year, that what you can see is a definite change in direction now with these asylum applications, not the asylum applications, these visa applications coming down quite significantly.
Superb stuff. Mark White, as ever, excellent analysis. Thank you for joining us on the show. And now, coming up, could the Prime Minister be set to call that snap early election? Well, he's got a cabinet meeting in around about half an hour's time, and the speculation is mounting by the minute. We'll be all over this story for you live as it happens. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello again. Here's your latest GB News weather forecast from the Met Office. There is more very wet weather to come across many parts of the UK as we go through the rest of today and into tomorrow. That's because the low pressure centre that is driving the persistent heavy rain across many areas is still gradually making its way northwestwards across the UK. Heavy rain then continuing for most parts. In the south, we have some heavy thunderstorms. They are going to continue as we head towards this evening, and they could cause some disruption. We're watching out for some frequent frequent lightning and some hail. But it's further north that we're going to see the highest rainfall totals, particularly across parts of North Wales, northwest England. Could see in excess of 100 millimetres through the next 24 hours or so, which is why some flooding is quite likely, and even some disruption quite possible across many parts of Scotland, even into eastern parts of Northern Ireland, because there will be so much rain around. That system, like I said, is drifting its way northwestwards, but it's making slow progress, and so it is going to be a wet night for many northern parts in particular. The rain continuing in places, though it is starting to ease as we go towards the early hours of tomorrow morning. Staying drier towards far southern parts, but temperatures generally not dropping a huge amount, many places holding up in double digits. As we go through tomorrow then, a bit of a north-south split, staying pretty damp or wet at times across northern parts, though the rain doesn't look like it will be quite as heavy as it was today. Nonetheless, some further flooding issues are still possible, and some blustery winds towards the northwest in particular. Further south, a drier story and some sunshine possible in the southeast, in which it should feel pleasantly warm with temperatures in the low 20s, markedly cooler elsewhere. In fact, some places under the rain may stay in single digits. More wet weather to come across northern parts as we go through tomorrow evening. Could be some heavier bursts for a time. Further southeast, a greater chance of staying dry and some clear skies perhaps. There will be a bit more rain across northern areas on Friday, and then Saturday looks likely to be the driest day of the weekend for most of us, before a bit more rain on Sunday. Bye-bye.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threats on.
Our job is to do what's in the best interest of our country.
You made my argument for me. My guests and I tackle the issues that really matter, with a sharp take on every story.
I'm hearing it up and down the country. That was a beginning, not an end.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel. GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio, and online.
This is GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 3:48. I'm Martin Daubney, and this is GB News. Now, is Rishi Sunak about to call a snap general election? Well, speculation is rife as the Prime Minister failed to rule out a snap-some election in PMQs earlier today, and rumours are on the rise of an announcement from Rishi Sunak very soon. But how will a snap election fare over in Wales? Well, Conservative sources have told GB News that they fear that there won't be a single Welsh Tory MP left after the election, with seats such as Monmouthshire and the North Wales wall flipping back red. Well, joining me now to discuss this is the Conservative member of the Welsh Parliament, Gareth Davies. Gareth, welcome to the show. Let's start with the speculation mounting. Round about a half an hour time, a cabinet meeting being called. All of the rumours are indicating Rishi may go to a snap election. What are your sources telling you?
Well, they are rumours, just rumours at the moment, because obviously that's a decision for Rishi Sunak and the cabinet to make. I understand that there's a rumour or a strong possibility that there's a cabinet meeting this afternoon. And we'll have to await, obviously, the outcome of that to see if the speculation is true. But it's pure speculation at the moment, and we'll just have to see. We'll have to see what happens.
There's some sense in this, despite the fact, of course, the Conservatives are 20 points behind the Labour Party, have been now for 10 consistent weeks. Yesterday, 15 European Union countries saying they would like to follow Rishi's lead on Rwanda. Good news on inflation today, interest rates to come, and some mixed news, but some good news on immigration, on visas today. Do you think the time is right to go to the nation?
Well, Rishi Sunak has said since the beginning of the year that he wants to have a general election in the second half of 2024. You know, the timings of how general elections are placed in terms of the days that they can be set dictates that it probably will be in the second half of 2024. You know, and you know, in that regard, you know, time is running out of this parliament. That's a reality. And the inflation figures that we've seen today, 2.3%, is better than the American inflation rate, and it's come down from a high of 11%. And Rishi Sunak has stuck to his promise, stuck to his plan that he would cut inflation, and he has indeed succeeded. So, and you know, with the progress that he's made on the Rwanda bill passing through Parliament, that he's been very successful in delivering that plan. And whatever time that there's an election called, whether the rumours are true or it's later on in the year, he is sticking to the plan, and indeed got a positive message to send out to the country, and hopefully people will oblige and re-elect Rishi Sunak as their Prime Minister.
And Gareth, what about this rumour that an early election could be bad news for Welsh Conservatives? The writing on the wall doesn't look too good.
Well, I would beg to differ, because there's a lot to play for here in Wales, and a lot of the issues in Wales are devolved to the Welsh Government, to the Senedd. That's my role and what I do. And what have we seen here in Wales? Keir Starmer said that he wants to use Wales as his blueprint for government. But what's the reality here in Wales? We have the longest NHS waiting lists in all UK nations. We've got the lowest education standards. We've got the 20 miles per hour policy, the deeply unpopular 20 miles per hour policy, with a petition that was signed by over 500,000 people wanting to scrap 20 miles per hour. So we've got a government here that's really not acting in the best interests of its people, and there's a lot of reasons for people not to vote Labour in Wales because of their record. And if it's any blueprint for Keir Starmer to go by, that message should be pushed across the UK to say, well, here is an example of a Labour government here in Wales. We've had, since devolution in 1999, we've only ever had one party in power. So it's a big message for the people of Wales, but also a message for the people across the UK to look to Wales and say, well, here's your example of a Labour government that we've had for 26 years. And this is what it'll look like in the UK.
Gareth, could I quickly ask you, we've only got a few seconds left, there's a debate at 4 o'clock today, starting very shortly, about that 20-mile-an-hour limit across Wales. That was off the back of reports by the Conservative Shadow Transport Minister in Wales, claiming that the 20-mile-an-hour limits have done nothing whatsoever to cut pollution in Wales.
I believe that's the case. I'm yet to see evidence that it's cut pollution rates in Wales. It's supposed to save lives, but we've only seen anecdotal evidence from select sources that the Welsh government have used around that. You know, when we're looking at NHS investments and saving lives, we see the failure day to day of their running of the NHS in Wales.
OK, Gareth, I'm afraid we simply have to leave it there, my friend. I'm sorry, we simply ran out of time, but thanks for joining us on the show, Gareth Davis there. Now, lots more coming up on today's show, including all the latest reaction as speculation mounts to whether the Prime Minister could call a snap early general election amid good news on the economy and migration figures. A cabinet meeting is due in around about 15 minutes' time. We'll have all of that coming up. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel, but first it's your weather with Alex Burker.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again. Here's your latest GB News weather forecast from the Met Office. There is more very wet weather to come across many parts of the UK as we go through the rest of today and into tomorrow. That's because the low pressure centre that is driving the persistent heavy rain across many areas is still gradually making its way northwestwards across the UK. Heavy rain then continuing for most parts. In the south, we have some heavy thunderstorms. They are going to continue as we head towards this evening, and they could cause some disruption. We're watching out for some frequent frequent lightning and some hail. But it's further north that we're going to see the highest rainfall totals, particularly across parts of North Wales, northwest England. Could see in excess of 100 millimetres through the next 24 hours or so, which is why some flooding is quite likely, and even some disruption quite possible across many parts of Scotland, even into eastern parts of Northern Ireland, because there will be so much rain around. That system, like I said, is drifting its way northwestwards, but it's making slow progress, and so it is going to be a wet night for many northern parts in particular. The rain continuing in places, though it is starting to ease as we go towards the early hours of tomorrow morning. Staying drier towards far southern parts, but temperatures generally not dropping a huge amount, many places holding up in double digits. As we go through tomorrow then, a bit of a north-south split, staying pretty damp or wet at times across northern parts, though the rain doesn't look like it will be quite as heavy as it was today. Nonetheless, some further flooding issues are still possible, and some blustery winds towards the northwest in particular. Further south, a drier story and some sunshine possible in the southeast, in which it should feel pleasantly warm with temperatures in the low 20s, markedly cooler elsewhere. In fact, some places under the rain may stay in single digits. More wet weather to come across northern parts as we go through tomorrow evening. Could be some heavier bursts for a time. Further southeast, a greater chance of staying dry and some clear skies perhaps. There will be a bit more rain across northern areas on Friday, and then Saturday looks likely to be the driest day of the weekend for most of us, before a bit more rain on Sunday. Bye-bye.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, I'm John Vincent. Queues on the M6 northbound in Staffordshire. There's 2 lanes closed for emergency repairs. That's between junction 12 Gailey and 13 for Stafford South. Queues on the M62 in West Yorkshire. Firstly, eastbound, there's a lane closed for a vehicle having a tyre change. That's between junction 22 Rishworth Moor and 23 for Huddersfield. Westbound, we've got up to 7 miles worth of queues for emergency bridge repairs between junction 22 Rishworth Moor and 21 for Milnrow. Queues on the M5 northbound in the West Midlands. Stop-start traffic there. There's a lane closed on the exit slip road towards the M6 North at junction 8. And there's queues on the M25 on the QE2 bridge clockwise and up to the Dartford tunnels anti-clockwise. It's all due to an earlier police incident. And that's the latest traffic and travel news.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
It's the biggest cash prize we've given away to date. An incredible £20,000 that you could use however you like. And because it's totally tax-free, every single penny will be in your bank account to do whatever you like with. £20,000 in tax-free cash really could be yours this summer. Hurry, you've got to be in it to win it. For another chance to win £20,000 in tax-free cash, text PRIZE to 63232. Text costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB05, PO Box 8690, Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 31st of May. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News.
Whenever Parliament is in session on a Wednesday at midday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions. We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
A very good afternoon to you. It's 4 p.m. and welcome to the Martin Daubney Show on GB News, and we're broadcasting live from the heart of Westminster, all across the UK. On today's show, is it time for an early general election? Well, rumours of an early election, perhaps as soon as July, are mounting to fever pitch here in Westminster, with inflation falling, visa numbers down, and 15 EU countries following Rishi Sunak's lead on the Rwanda deal. Are the Tories right to go to the polls, or would they be turkeys voting for Christmas? Next up, law and out of order. An astonishing leaked memo from the National Police Chiefs Council has recommended pausing non-priority arrests and suspend operations that may trigger large numbers of arrests, such as riots or protests. Well, why? Well, because our jails are full, apparently. Well, I'll be joined by a top cop who says that they will refuse to follow such orders. And meanwhile, at the Post Office inquiry earlier on today, the shamed former chief, Paula Venables, wept as she gave evidence with a sensational allegation that she knew. We'll cross live for all the latest. And on visa numbers, data released on visas today granted to foreigners to come to Britain has been a mixed bag for the Tories. On the upside, overall applications are down, student dependents visas are down by 79%, but skilled worker visas have gone up by 41%. Will we ever take back control of our borders? And that's all coming up in your next hour. Welcome to the show. Delight to have your company. Fever pitch is the rumour mill in Downing Street right now. About 15 minutes' time, a cabinet meeting called by Rishi Sunak. David Cameron has been called back from Albania. Grant Shapps has cancelled a trip abroad, and Jeremy Hunt has cancelled an appearance on the Peston Show tonight. All hands on deck at Downing Street. Will be live for that in about 15 minutes' time to find out, will we go to the polls early? Get in touch. Would that be the right thing to do, or would it be madness for the Conservatives? Have your say. GBNews.com/your say. But before all of that, it's your headlines, and it's Sophia Wensler.
Martin, thank you. Good afternoon. It's 4:02. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister has hailed a fall in inflation as a major moment for the UK economy. Driven by lower gas and electricity prices, the latest figures show inflation dropped to 2.3% in April for the first time in nearly 3 years. It's fuelled speculation of a summer general election. When urged to get on with it and call a vote during Prime Minister's questions, Rishi Sunak repeated his intentions, sticking to what he's previously said.
Spoiler alert, there is going to be a general election in the second half of this year, and at that moment the British people will in fact see the truth about the honourable gentleman opposite me, because that will be the choice at the next election, Mr. Speaker. A party that is not able to say to the country what they would do, a party that would put at risk our hard-earned economic stability, or the Conservatives that are delivering a secure future for our United Kingdom.
Labour Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves says there's no reason to celebrate.
This is about more than lines on a graph. It's about family finances. And the truth is, after 14 years of Conservative government, working families and pensioners are still worse off. And the truth is, I'm much more ambitious for the country than Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt seem to be.
Meanwhile, people in Birmingham say they're still struggling to make ends meet, despite the latest figures.
I think it's propaganda. Go in the shops and the prices, they're either going up or you're getting less for your money. So I'm not seeing where the inflation is actually hitting.
We can do a lot better, can't we, as people? We are feeling the pinch at the moment, aren't we? We all are.
I think the prices have increased so much over the past 24 months that the fact that they're slowing down is a good thing, but ultimately people's disposable income just isn't there.
In other news, a nursery worker has been sentenced to 14 years in prison at Manchester Crown Court over the death of a baby. Kate Ruffley strapped the 9-month-old girl face down on a beanbag for more than an hour and a half at Tiny Toes Nursery in Stockport in May 2022. The 37-year-old then failed to check on the distressed child and later found Genevieve Meehan was unresponsive. She was convicted of the baby's manslaughter on Monday. Police say the deaths of 2 women whose bodies were found at a property in Nottingham don't appear to be suspicious. Officers were called to an address after concerns were raised about their welfare. It's believed their bodies may have been there for some time before being discovered. Neighbours in Radford believe they're being failed by local authorities.
It's really shocked me. I've just come out on the Wednesday market doing what I've got to do, you know what I mean, and then find out the two women have lost their lives. And of course it's upsetting. It's like I wouldn't want, you know, if you've seen some kid getting knocked out in the street, you wouldn't want that. You don't want it from your area. Now everyone's going to be on alert now. And all these people are just sitting back, oh, we've done this check, we didn't do that check. But they've left it too late. People are dying.
The former post office boss at the centre of the Horizon IT scandal has admitted making mistakes during her time in charge during tearful evidence at the Horizon inquiry. Paula Venables apologised for telling MPs the business was successful in every court case against sub-postmasters, but she insists she didn't know about the Horizon system when she joined and that no one told her of any bugs. She's also denied any conspiracy to cover up the scandal.
I fully accept now that the post office, the post office knew that. I completely accepted. Personally, I didn't know that, and I'm incredibly sorry that that happened to those people and to so many others.
Speaking outside the inquiry, sub-postmaster Christopher Head had little sympathy.
You can't rewrite history. Is that she wanted to protect the post office brand at all costs. That was what she did, and we can see that that's what has happened.
And Conservative MP Craig Mackinlay has made his first appearance in Parliament 8 months after contracting sepsis. He received a standing ovation as he entered the Commons. The member for South Thanet, who had extreme surgery to remove both his hands and feet, was given just a 5% chance of survival after being put in a coma for 16 days. And for the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Martin.
Thank you, Sophia. Now, we've got one heck of an hour ahead of us now. Speculation continues to grow that Rishi Sunak will call a snap general election later this afternoon, as ministers have been called to a compulsory cabinet meeting, which is set to take place in the next few minutes. Now, he didn't refuse to rule out a summer vote at PMQs earlier today, and the Labour Party have told him to get on with it. Well, let's get on with it ourselves and go back to Downing Street and speak to GB News' political correspondent, Catherine Forster. Catherine, you are at the eye of the storm. What's the latest? Who's been arriving at Downing Street?
Yes, so various cabinet members arriving. Johnny Mercer in the past few minutes, Andrew Mitchell, Grant Shapps. We're all shouting at them, of course. Are there going to be a summer election? Unsurprisingly.
OK, Catherine Forster's audio there is a bit inaudible. We'll come back to her when we get a better connection soon. And we can now also get the thoughts of the former Labour MP, Sean Simon. Sean, welcome to the show. So, is the Labour Party licking its lips at the prospect of an early general election, if that's what we can expect to come out of Downing Street today?
They pretty much are, I would say. They expect to win, although they are scared of losing. Let's be clear about that.
OK, and the polls seem to be putting the Labour Party 20 points ahead now for 10 consistent weeks. Yet there has been some good news for Rishi Sunak in the past couple of days. 15 countries, European Union member states, no less, writing to the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, say they want to do a scheme similar to Rwanda. Inflation down to 2.3% today, and some good news on getting visas down to students. So with that all as a prevailing wind, perhaps there is some good news for the Conservatives, and taking control of the agenda is the right thing to do.
I don't think anybody on the Labour side will be interpreting any of those things in those ways. I don't think there'll be any sense that the the Conservatives have recaptured the agenda. I think there's a very strong feeling that the Rwanda scheme is a PR disaster. And it's clear that over the course of the summer and the rest of this year, the economic numbers, the headline numbers, are going to get better. Inflation today is down again, although not by as much as it was supposed to be. And interest rate cuts are expected, although we haven't actually seen any. These all go in the government's favour. Really, they should have been arguments for the government to be playing a long game. No government has ever called a general election when they've been this far behind for this long. It's like if somebody asks you, do you want to jump off the cliff now and hope for a soft landing, or do you want to do it in 6 months' time? You usually wait the 6 months and hope that something turns up.
But isn't it not the case, though, that perhaps there is good news? As I said, the last couple of days have been better for the Conservatives, although admittedly against that general polling trend. It seems to be in favour of the Labour Party, but there has also been speculation, Sean, of a hung parliament. It's better to act and seem to be in control of the agenda than simply wait for a slow suicide, isn't it?
Well, I guess that must be what Rishi Sunak's thinking. He must just be thinking. I mean, and I was talking to Conservatives today, Conservative MPs who were saying, let's just get on with it. It can only get worse over the summer. Like nice weather over the summer, there are going to be 10 times the number of boats. It's going to be every day, these stories. Conservative MPs saying that, our voters care about this and they don't believe what we're saying about it. So maybe they have just thought, look, let's put an end to this now. It's not going to get any better. Maybe Rishi Sunak just wants to spend the summer with his family in California.
And I think you're absolutely right. Every day that goes by in the summer, Sean Simon, those boats will surely increase in numbers. Thanks for joining us. That's Sean Simon, former Labour Party MP. As we approach the election, we can now cross back to Downing Street and speak to GB News' political correspondent, Catherine Forster. Catherine, you're getting drowned out by people at one end of Downing Street. Now we can hear you loud and clear. Tell us who's coming, who's going, and what's the mood at the centre of the eye of the storm where you are there outside number 10?
Yes, so the Cabinet coming in, we've seen Grant Shapps, Steve Barclay, lots of others, Johnny Mercer. Everybody tight-lipped, of course, being shouted at, is there going to be a summer election? It's likely, of course, at the moment that they simply do not know. I was talking a few minutes ago to two of the number 10 team that I was actually on the plane with the Prime Minister in Vienna just yesterday. They simply didn't know. And, at the moment, this is very tightly controlled, but it does feel like momentum is building more and more. It feels like there is definitely a big announcement coming. What could that be but an election? Now, we don't know if it will be an election on July the 4th. It could be a reshuffle, but then why on earth, with the Foreign Secretary David Cameron, be coming back from Albania early? Why would Grant Shapps be postponing his trip if it was just a reshuffle? It could be a reshuffle and announcement of an election possibly for the autumn, a bit of a rebrand, a bit of a refresh. Number 10 at lunchtime wouldn't confirm that the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, would still be in post at the general election. So a lot of moving parts, a jigsaw puzzle that we're trying to piece together. We don't have all the pieces yet, but certainly huge numbers of press here, huge numbers of political journalists, a sense of expectation, Cabinet starting and potentially then an announcement following that.
OK, Catherine Forster, that meeting due to start any moment now. Of course, we'll cut back to you live for all the latest as we have it. Catherine Forster, live at Downing Street. Thank you very much for joining us. Now, we're the People's Channel, so we'd like to ask you for your thoughts. We've been out and about today in Glasgow, asking the good people there if they think the right thing to do is go for an early general election.
No doubt we need change. Things aren't working, things are broken, people are suffering. Not that I think that the opposition would do an increasingly better job, but I think they would do a better job than the current government.
Absolutely. And if one did come, would you be comfortable saying what way you would fall on?
No, I'll keep that to myself.
That's all right. There's definitely an age barrier. So tell me this then: who is least deserving of your vote?
Tories, absolutely Tories.
Any reason?
Look at the country. Look at the state we're in. That's pretty much all you really need to say, isn't it?
Do you think we should have an early snap election?
No.
No. Are you quite happy? Any idea if there was one, kind of what kind of side you would fall on?
Labour.
I think we need a wee bit of change and a wee bit in power and stuff like that. Tories, and my mate would go for Labour, you know what I mean? I was an SNP supporter for years and that during the referendum and stuff like that, but just now, you know what I mean, I just think, you know what I mean, Labour. The more I listen to kind of Keir Starmer, I know he can be a wee bit I'm not going to say the word, but I think it's just time for change and that, so it'd be good, you know what I mean, me personally anyway.
There you go, they stopped just short, didn't they, of doing a Brenda from Bristol and saying, oh God, not another one. Now, we'll of course have all of the latest on that story as it happens, that meeting happening any moment now. But moving on to another story that's got us going today here at GB News, is Britain's justice system now completely broken? This is the question that many people are asking after it was revealed that police are sensationally being told to make fewer arrests due to a lack of space in British prisons. You couldn't make this up. Chief constables are also being advised to suspend any operations that may trigger a large number of arrests until there is enough cell capacity. And mounting speculation grows of an impending general election. Will this news damage the Conservatives' image as the party of law and order? Well, I'm delighted to say I'm now joined in the studio by Hampshire Police and Crime Commissioner Donna Jones. Donna, always a delight to have you. Now, I knew this story would get you hot under the collar. Quite simply, the notion of a copper being told not to be a copper, it defies belief.
Yeah, it really does. Well, all I can say is not on my watch and not on my Chief Constable's watch, actually. This letter has been taken slightly out of context. This is not a message that's actually come from the government, from Number 10, from the Home Secretary. Yeah. This is some speculation, and it's a letter that was written by the National Police Chiefs Council lead for custody, who was preemanating what he thinks might be coming with a prison space crisis, which, you know, let's be honest, that is there. There is an issue with prison spaces across the country. But what I can say, I've put a statement out today. A number of Chief Constables, including Sir Mark Rowley, the Commissioner of the Met, have put out very clear statements today to say police will be continuing to arrest, business as usual. Any prison space issue is not a policing issue. It's an issue for the Ministry of Justice and for the government. It's not an issue for policing. Here. It's not a copper's job on the beat to make split-second decisions about should I arrest this person in case there's room for them in a nick. It's Absolutely. Not their job to do that. It's their job to police as they see fit. And what can I ask you what is a non-urgent arrest? So this would be where you've got an investigation that's been going on perhaps for a couple of months, sometimes a complex, multi-handed investigation where you've got a number of suspects. Now, when the evidence becomes available, when there is sufficient, cause to arrest somebody, they will then go and do that as part of the ongoing investigation, bring them in under caution and interview them. And I think what the Deputy Chief Constable of Surrey, who's the custody lead, national custody lead, was trying to say today is, look, if you don't have to do it today or in the next 48 hours, consider not doing it. But that's not right. The second that in this country we stop arresting people, we stop arresting criminals or people who are at suspicion of doing something wrong, is the day that we start to have societal breakdown in this country. Police must continue, business as usual, and I'm really, really clear about that. Excellent to hear that. And this brings me on to my next point, this situation where there are a large number of arrests, the risk of. Well, that means riots. That means protests. For example, the pro-Palestinian protests have been lots of talk, as you know, Donna, continued allegations that the police are soft-soaping these events. Now, this seems to be rubber stamping that. Don't go anywhere. We might arrest a lot of people because we haven't got space to lock them up. Yeah, what message does it send out to shoplifters, to burglars, to all of those kind of people? That's why the letter was actually quite damaging. That's why people like myself have come out very strongly today. And I also welcome Mark Rowley's involvement and him speaking on behalf of the largest police force in the country. It sends the wrong message to criminals. But what I will say to them, if they're watching now, and I'm sure they're not, because I'm sure that you have wholly decent people watching GB News, is if you commit a crime, expect to be arrested and expect to be brought to justice. That is absolutely clear. Great to hear. Now, I need to ask you, because you're switched on politically, as the chair of the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners, they'll be up for election too, if there is
an election. What are your sources telling you about the prospects of an early general election?
Well, I am a Conservative politician, as you've said, and yes, there has been speculation all day today. Technically, the last day to call a general election before the summer recess would be next week, but that would mean doing it very, very quickly and having the paperwork ready. So doing it today, calling it today, if that's what the Prime Minister does at 5 p.m, means they've got several days to then get the paperwork ready to pass the legal order through Parliament for that general election, which I think is being speculated as July the 4th. Yes, I mean, it is certainly what I am expecting. If I was a betting person, that's where I put my money right now.
You think there will be that early snap July election?
Look, inflation down 2.3% today. That's the Conservatives, being able to reassure the public that the cost of living crisis is coming to an end. Inflation's back to where it now should have been. That is incredible when you think about the strength of our economy and the recovery that we have had over the last 18 months, 2 years. We now need interest rates to come down to make people's mortgages cheaper. Actually, what the Prime Minister is doing here is trying to make sure that he's doing what's best for the country and getting that general election done. If that is what he does at 5 o'clock today, well, that will give the Conservatives a good chance of forming the next government.
But the polls place the Labour Party 20 points ahead, have them for the past 10 weeks. Could this be a situation of this is Turkey's voting for Christmas?
Well, I mean, look, the summer's not going to be great. The small boat crisis is still not sorted out yet, is it? Yes, we've got the Rwanda flights largely on track now, and we are expecting to see people going off to Rwanda in their quantity over the next couple of months. But I really think now that this is about what's right for the country. And actually, people like me, I'm a Conservative politician. I was elected just 3 weeks ago with a massive majority in Hampshire. That should be encouraging to a number of our MPs as well.
Superb. Donna Jones, the chair of the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners. Always an absolute delight to have your common sense take on the show. Please come back. Every time you come in, I say, please come back more often. You're excellent. And you saw some pictures there on your screens of Downing Street. People still going into that meeting, rumoured to be happening any moment now. And I've lots more on that story, of course, at 5 o'clock. And there's plenty of coverage on our website, gbnews.com. You've helped to make it the fastest growing national news website in the country. Now, on the way, we'll discuss how any move towards an election in early July could be used by Rishi Sunak to conveniently time it to coincide with those first flights to Rwanda. Don't go anywhere.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
we'll be there.
This is GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
So there are migrants who come here and they make a big contribution and they pay a lot of tax. And some types of migration from some countries, that's particularly the case.
On that, sorry, Neil,
others,
on that, you say migrants from the Middle East, North Africa and Turkey, aged 25 to 64, are almost twice as likely to be economically inactive as someone born in the UK. So essentially, we've invited people to come here. Presumably, we believe they're going to then work. And then they're twice as likely to be economically inactive. I mean, that's a recipe for economic disaster.
Yeah, so in the last census, we saw that the employment rate of people who are born in the UK is higher than the employment rate of people who've come here from another country. And that tells you that migration policy is not on track at all. And as I say...
Hang on, doesn't that just account for those dependents that are brought with them? So people from the Middle East and North Africa are much more likely to have, for example, a wife who stays at home and a husband who goes out to work. That largely would account for having half as much economic activity.
No, so I should have said, what I meant is even among those who are of working age, excluding the dependents and the children and so on, the employment rate is lower. Now, for some groups...
Because some people stay at home to look after children, perhaps?
Yeah, so there's a lot of people who are economically inactive for that reason. There's a lot more higher rates of unemployment as well among some groups. And if you look, broadly speaking, the trend is that people who come here from rich countries, from either Western Europe or from countries like Australia, Canada, New Zealand, the US and so on, they tend to have very high employment rates and very high earnings as well, and you get clearly a benefit from that. But then if you have a lot of migration from lower skilled people, particularly from poor countries, who have an incentive to come here, even if they're ending up working in the minimum wage, because it's still a lot more than in a very poor country, then you will tend to see people who have either quite low rates of employment for the reasons you're just describing, and also potentially quite low wages as well. So they're very unlikely to be net contributors to the
Neil, let's not pretend that the immigration debate is all about economics.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News with Dubes & Co from 6, followed by Farage at 7. At 8, Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg addresses the state of the nation. And at 9, join Patrick Christie's Tonight, followed by Headliners at 11. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. The time is 4:25. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News. Now, any move towards an early election, you can see there live pictures from Downing Street. That meeting, cabinet meeting, believed to be taking place right now. All the speculation is on a July early snap election, and any move towards that early election in July could be timed to coincide with the first flights to Rwanda. It will be a key battleground for Rishi Sunak, who'd also want to talk up his record on defence spending as well as his stand on illegal immigration. Well, GB News' home and security editor Mark White joins us now with the latest. Mark, welcome back to the show. So we are poised there for any moment now, breaking news from inside Downing Street. But as you said, key battlegrounds, Rishi Sunak will be keen to keep the message on point, Rwanda and defence. Tell us more.
Yeah, I think it's looking increasingly likely that we are going to get that date confirmed of a general election on the 4th of July. And if that is the case, it does in some senses make some sense for the government, because if you look at the small boats issue, the sending of asylum seekers to that safe third country, Rwanda, then the likelihood is that we could have the first flight or two off the ground by the 4th of July, because it's on track for early July. They could even potentially bring it forward. They're being very careful with who they're selecting for these flights to ensure that there's little to no chance of any successful court intervention. So if they get flights off the ground before that election takes place, they can go to the country and say, look, we've managed to fulfil our promise. It's been hard fought, but we've got the flights off the ground. And the advantage of that, Martin, is they don't then have to show that the policy is successful, because there won't be time to show that it is a successful deterrent. But they can say, if you stick with us, it will be a successful deterrent. But if you go with Labour, then the Labour Party have said in terms they will end the Rwanda deal as soon as they get into government. And that, of course, as we know, is coming at a time when 15 other countries around Europe have said they are actively now looking at these safe third countries as a way out of the immigration mess that they're finding their own countries embroiled in as well. So that is a potential difficulty for Labour going forward into a general election, and one that no doubt the Conservatives will be only too happy to try to exploit.
Yeah, Mark, it was an astonishing situation yesterday. 15 EU member states will now be writing to European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, who actually herself has said that she would like domestically in Germany a similar plan, a third country plan. That will put a spring in Rishi Sunak's step. And something else, Mark White, you've been consistently predicting since the beginning, because of the weather patterns in the summer when crossings are more likely in small boats. You've been saying it makes sense to call an early election and not allow that seasonal deluge over the channel to recommence.
Well, especially as we are now more than 37% up at last count on the numbers crossing this year compared to last year. And last year, of course, they were 36% down, and the government was able to say, look at our small boats policy, it's making a difference, we're reducing the numbers coming across the channel.
channel. This year they can't say that. It's a complete reversal. So the last thing, in a sense, that they would want to do is to get into the really busy summer periods, have an absolute armada coming across the channel, and then try to go to the country on the back of that. If they can get an election underway earlier, then it perhaps saves the worst of that. The other thing to mention about Rwanda, Martin, that nobody really focuses on, but is an important area of Rwanda going forward if they were to expand the policy. It's not just people coming across in small boats. There are many, many thousands of people in the UK who are visa overstayers, who are people that are perhaps foreign national offenders, individuals who have been denied the right to stay in the UK, but because they come from countries such as Afghanistan or Iran or other dysfunctional or dangerous regimes, we as a country cannot, under the law, move these people back to their home countries, and the only solution then of getting rid of these individuals is having a safe third country. So it's not just a solution potentially to the small boats crisis, and I think that's why other European countries are now seriously looking at this. It is a potential solution to migration issues more generally in trying to return people to countries where you normally wouldn't be able to do that.
And Mark, we just saw the Downing Street Cats there moving in. That's one voter that want this over to be over as quickly as possible. But on a serious point, Mark White, you also mentioned on the issue of defence, Rishi Sunak, of course, committing to the 3.5% GDP commitment. That's another key battleground. He'll be keen to keep the message on point.
Yeah, absolutely right there, Martin. And I mean, the issue around defence, it's not normally a big vote winner. But we are in very different times at this election, with the war in Ukraine, with the situation in the Middle East, where you have a very precarious situation between Israel and Iran in particular. You've got the Iranian-backed Houthi rebels in Yemen targeting shipping out in that area. You've got a never more precocious China potentially threatening action against Taiwan. We are in a very uncertain world. We've heard it from politicians, not just in this country, but in other nations as well, that we are effectively entering a pre-war footing at the moment. So given that, this is likely to be something that the Conservatives can really try to make some political capital on as well, to portray themselves having committed to 2.5% of GDP in the coming years to defence, to expose Labour for not yet committing to that, only promising to look at the potential to look at 2.5% of GDP as a target. So that's another key area at a time when people are understandably very worried about the potential for conflict around the globe.
OK, thank you, Mark White. And all eyes now on that door, that famous black door, 10 Downing Street. That meeting believed to be underway as we speak. Mark White, thank you for your expert analysis, as ever. Now, let's come back to the studio, and I'm joined by the political correspondent at The Spectator, James Hill. James, welcome to the show. So you just walked through Westminster. What's the rumour mill telling you? What are your sources telling you within the Tory party?
Well, I mean, I think it says it all. That I was just having a conversation with a former cabinet minister in Parliament who was saying, well, of course it's going to be election now. Of course they're going to declare it, explaining the reasons why. And we were then joined by a second MP who went, there's not going to be an election, is there? That, for me, shows where the Conservative Party is right now. Half of them think he's going to call an election. The other half can't believe it. And there's a lot of panic and disbelief going on right now across the road in Parliament.
There is a lot of panic. There has been some good news, as we just outlined there. Success on 15 EU member states wanting to back a Rwanda-style plan. Some good news on inflation today, 2.3%, approaching the target of 2%. Some mixed news on visas, and those going down by 79% on students. James, but the fact remains the Conservative Party has been trailing the Labour Party by 20 points in every opinion poll when they're aggregated out for 10 weeks now. Where's the logic in going to the electorate early with that prevailing wind?
I completely agree, and I think we've got actually a leading article in tomorrow's Spectator talking about warning the Conservatives this is a potential, charge of the Light Brigade going to happen over the next couple of weeks or so. But I think the argument, Number 10 have clearly gambled on is, look, not much has changed the polls in the past 12 months or so. It's clearly better to wrong-foot the Labour Party. We've got a bit of a track record on this. We've got, at the moment, the Rwanda scheme could potentially still work, hasn't been sort of disproved yet. So there's that. There's also the economy improving as well. So all those things feeding through. I think having a bit of fuel left in the tank to run on, that's their message.
OK, James Hill, thank you. Please stick with us. We need to cross now to Downing Street Live, and we're going to join our political editor, Chris Hope. Chris Hope joins us on the show. Chris, what's the latest on the ground? We're expecting that meeting. Is it underway now? What have you got for us?
Well, Martin, we're here in Downing Street here with an enormous press pack of people expecting some form of statement from Number 10 behind me. No word yet on that, but the widespread speculation here in Downing Street and the wider Westminster is that the PM is going for a July the 4th general election. That is speculation. We are not confirming it yet at GB News, but it is surprising for many. Many would say, why is this happening now when you've got the economy ticking up, no interest rate yet cuts to alleviate the mortgage misery for millions caused by, many people think, from the Liz Truss premiership. But there's wide speculation, Martin, that we are heading for a summer July the 4th general election, not confirmed yet by Downing Street, but everyone who would know, who I would normally be speaking to when would speak back to me, is silent on that at the moment. So it's looking like that is where we could be going, but again, no confirmation.
And Chris, what's the logic in this? We were just saying in the studio here that the Conservative Party is 20 points behind. The Labour Party has been now for 10 consistent weeks. Every opinion poll has a big majority for the Labour Party. There has been some good news on Rwanda. There's been some good news on inflation coming down. But the prevailing headwind seems to be a Tory defeat. Why would you go to the country early with that as the mood music?
I don't think it makes a lot of sense to many senior ministers I speak to. They look at what's going on with the country. Time was on the side of the government. There's no election expected or required legally until January next year. So the idea being allow for a second budget in September, for interest rates to fall twice if the MPC agree at the Bank of England. Then you have net migration falling to around the level of 2019 by about September. You've got maybe the first flights taking off. We've got a pint of beer bet on that, haven't we, Martin, with the migrant flights, and the economy ticking up. So all those five things, we're looking towards an autumn election. I was told November the 21st, November the 14th. That would allow the government to go ahead and have this, the Tories to have a fundraising party conference when they expect to then call the election straight after. Instead, Mr Sunak's going early. Now, why do that? I think it's a big risk. He's 25 points behind the polls. It's the biggest risk of his life if he goes for it, because had he waited and gone long, he wouldn't be blamed for any defeat. If he goes early and the government and the country Tories are defeated, as the poll suggests, he will be personally blamed for that defeat. And that's why it's a surprise. But looking at it, they may think that the promise of the economy getting better, the promise of all those economic data I discussed there ticking up, the promise of that could be enough to try and have an election. They clearly think that the Labour leader in the polls is soft. They're looking at those don't knows, maybe 25% of don't knows haven't declared yet, and get them back on side with the Tory government, they can go for it. But it comes weeks after this very difficult local election results. It's a surprise, and it's the biggest risk of Rishi Sunak's career if he goes for it.
There is another factor. Mark White was just saying to us, our Home and Security editor, that an earlier election, Chris, would stop the numbers of small boats coming over the channel. They always go up, of course, during the summer months, with the recognition, perhaps, that it's impossible to stop the boats. Might it make more sense to go earlier to head off that potential problem?
Certainly going ahead of the summer rush that Mark White has so dutifully reported for GB News would be a way of dealing with that. But I just think that, many senior cabinet ministers I've been speaking to today were not expecting an election, and we weren't really until we saw David Cameron being recalled from a visit to Albania. Grant Shapps has delayed a trip overseas. Again, this feels very, very portentous here in Downing Street for an election that very few were expecting. Rishi Sunak would say, he always said it would be in the second half of the year. Well, by my calculation, July the 4th is just about in the second half of the year, so it's delivered on that promise. But he's making a massive risk here, Martin. He's giving away the advantage he had of improving data on the economy, on mortgages, on net migration, and maybe even illegal migration. All those numbers were meant to be ticking up. And rather than wait until that was happening and then tell voters don't risk messing it up by getting Labour into power, he's going on the promise of that happening if he calls the election, and that is a huge risk, one he didn't have to take.
And Chris, not only a huge risk, but as you say, the blame will fall squarely on him if there is a bad defeat. And also, Chris, a lot of those Tory MPs, 66 of them and counting and rising, are standing down at the election. A lot of those who will stand and fight, expecting to lose, they won't be very grateful of the fact if they're put out of office sooner, will they? Could there be anger from within the Tory party at going early?
Well, I've got a text message already to say, will this race stop the election be stopped by letter of no confidence going into Rishi Sunak? Now, I felt that Sunak had passed his danger point last week with that speech he gave in a think tank last Monday. But there are many MPs who are facing, looking at the polls and wondering, why on earth are you risking losing our livelihood? Why not wait longer and delay having any election? That might be a better solution. But if he goes ahead, this will be as surprising, I think, as when Theresa May called her election back in 2017, when numbers had been denying one would be called. She called that, of course, because the Tories were 20 points ahead in the polls. Now they're 20 points behind in the polls, so why call a July 4th election? But that is a speculation in Downing Street. We are waiting for confirmation from number 10.
And Chris, it would be an astonishing roll of the dice if this were to pass. And as you mentioned there, the prospect of those letters of no confidence going in. Until now, Chris, the likes of Penny Mordaunt's, even the Suella Bravermans have been saying, no, we must stick with Rishi, we must stick with the plan. If, however, they feel he is doing something precarious, something dangerous, something life-threatening to a lot of those Conservative MPs, do you think the prospect of that leadership challenge, those letters going in, dramatically increases?
I think if he calls the election today, Martin, that will be for the birds, because very swiftly Parliament is dissolved. He's due to meet the King tonight anyway on a usual meeting. That might be an idea in normal times, but these aren't normal times. MPs will be very quickly getting on with campaigning, and that will start very quickly. Next week, MPs are due to have their half-term break. Many have booked holidays. I've talked to several today. They will be cancelled. There'll be a lot of grumpy Tory MPs about this. Labour were not expecting, I don't think. Everyone thought we were looking at an autumn election. If he calls it now, it will be a big surprise, and he'd be hoping, I think, that the surprise might deliver maybe a Tory victory in the election, but the odds are very long on that.
And Chris, I was speaking with Sean Simon, a former Labour Party MP. He was licking his lips. He was practically doing cartwheels at the prospect of an early general election. What have the Labour sources you've been speaking to today been saying about this? I mean, everything is nailed on for a Labour victory. If you believe the prevailing wind, are the Labour Party delighted at the prospect of an early election? And after all, they've been calling for an early election for months now.
Well, it's a job of the opposition, whether it's the Lib Dems or Labour, to call for an election. That's the point of being in opposition. You're ready to form a government. In fact, you want to bring the government down at any opportunity. That's our democracy, and that's how it works. But no one I was speaking to today thought they'd be called an election this afternoon. We are quite used to having to deal with speculation about the election and then ruling it out and talking to the usual suspects. The difference today is that the usual suspects are not returning phone calls. We were expecting them to normally knock it on the head. That didn't happen shortly after Prime Minister's questions when the PM's key aides spoke to journalists, and it's got noisier and noisier as the day goes on, as these cabinet ministers have cancelled their visit. Today's cabinet meeting was meant to be held yesterday, but the PM was in Vienna talking about a deal on migration, and the idea had been that would be held delayed till today, but we are expecting a political cabinet to be held after the main cabinet. So it does feel very much like we are looking towards a summer election that few people were expecting, Martin.
And Chris, a very quick final question. Sorry I'm taking so much of your time, but this is fascinating. You've been in politics a long time. When Tory MPs, when ministers go quiet like this and they don't quash the rumours, does that suggest to you that this now is looking increasingly likely of a July the 4th election?
Yes, that's right. Well, exactly. This is not what was expected. Many Tory MPs are planning overseas trips. We're not expecting an election today. I think this is probably because the idea of an election was being held very closely around the team around Rishi Sunak. He's quite a tight group there. They certainly were hoping they'll be glad about the surprise amongst the assembled media that there is no election, that there could be an election called today. Certainly they will be ill-advised to walk so many journalists up the hill and then not to call one. But this is not what people were expecting to happen today. But I think it looks, look, we are going to get some news at some point today from Number 10, and it could be interesting. I think it's not what many senior Tories were saying to us. They've been saying, wait until the summer. Many have not even printed their, until the autumn, many have not even printed their leaflets. That is a surprise that we were getting. I've got seen to my right here, the Number 10 spokesman is setting up a camera. That's it. I can now report on GB News that there will be a statement from the Prime Minister at 5 p.m. So stay tuned to GB News. At 5 p.m. we are hearing a statement here from the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak. Next to me you'll see aides to the PM setting up cameras. There's a helicopter over above. Something is happening in Downing Street. It looks very likely an election to be called. We'll wait and see. But we can report now on GB News that there will be a statement here in Downing Street from the Prime Minister at 5 p.m, Martin.
OK, Chris Hope, you stay there. We'll be coming back to you for that. And just to repeat that breaking news, Rishi Sunak set to address the nation from Downing Street at 5 p.m. And all of the money seems to be on now, the increasing likelihood of a July the 4th general election. Let's cut back to our studio in Westminster and speak to the political correspondent at The Spectator, James Hill. James, you were nodding away sagely during that, and your phone's been lighting up like a Christmas tree. It seems now increasingly likely July the 4th, Independence Day.
And I think we cannot understate how much shock this is causing in Westminster, and particularly the Conservative Party. The Cabinet are going to be presented, presumably, with a fait accompli today, 4:15. They've all been brought in. There's going to be, the announcement at 5. A lot of MPs saying, what on earth are we doing here? Why are we going now? We've got months left, as Chris was talking about there. And I think what Rishi Sunak wants to do in this election is present a united Conservative Party against the Labour Party, which would, like Labour would ruin the country. But, of course, you've immediately got off to a bad start with lots of Tory MPs already saying, what on earth are we doing? Why are we going now? What are we going to stand on? And so I think that it might not go as smoothly as Rishi Sunak hopes.
And the huge point here, James, we're not quite at the 1997 level, the record level of Conservatives who will not stand at the next general election, but we're getting pretty close, 66 and rising. And there'll be a lot of the people that I talk to, that we have on this show very often, who are going to stand and fight, who, to be frank, let's be honest, they were hoping for a few more months in office. A lot of politicians will go back to Civvy Street. They'll go back to what they did before. Life after politics is very, very difficult. Might there be some resentment, some anger within the party? Rishi Sunak, he's a self-made millionaire. A lot of the people, they have ordinary jobs after politics.
And I think because so many people are blindsided by this, I think half of Downing Street weren't even aware, a lot of MPs weren't aware, and they're going to be saying, hang on a sec, Rishi will be fine, but what about the rest of us MPs who are going to lose our jobs? Current polling suggests around half of them could lose their jobs. So I think that there's going to be a lot of that overshadowing the beginning of this announcement. The key thing, of course, the last time we had a so-called snap election, a surprise election, was 2017. That point, Theresa May was 20 points ahead. Now Rishi Sunak is 20 points behind. So he's going to have an awful lot to try and turn that around. And even though we're wrong-footing Labour, that's not going to be enough, probably.
And if you recall, as many do, that early election, which I think Theresa May, perhaps with a huge degree of complacency looking back, believed that it'd be a walk. Let's get a bigger majority to push that mandate through. Instead, it almost let Jeremy Corbyn into Downing Street.
Absolutely, and I think the danger for Rishi Sunak is very contingent on events twofold, one of which is the Rwanda migration scheme, presuming that the Home Office is going to carry on working until the 4th of July. They don't down tools during Purdah. How's that going to work out, and given the Home Office's track record on that? Are they really the best people to trust to get this off the ground? And the second point is, of course, interest rates as well. And given the news today that inflation is 2.3%, not 2%, there have therefore been shifts in the market suggesting that actually there's not going to be a rate cut next month by the Bank of England. So if interest rates don't come down, that's a big hostage to fortune, and a lot of Tory voters will not thank the government for that.
And there is a lot of talk from senior Conservatives this morning, Jacob Rees-Mogg and a few others, saying to the Bank of England, it's time now for that interest rate cut. But of course, the Bank of England don't need to dance to Jacob Rees-Mogg's tune. They don't need to dance to the Conservative Party's tune. And an interest rate cut would be a gift to Rishi Sunak. It would be signs, as he keeps saying, the plan is working. But or the Bank of England political? Would they hold that back?
I mean, I suspect that the Bank of England, inside their own hearts, would want to do the government no favours after the last few years they've had. But I think it's just a very difficult position where you're contingent on others' good fortune or making mistakes, etc. And I think an awful lot of things need to go wrong for Labour the next 6 weeks, and an awful lot of things need to go right for the Conservatives. So it's going to be a very difficult time, and I wait to see what they're going to run on.
And James, as you said a moment ago, and we've been hearing for many, many weeks, as those leadership rumours, those challenges were going in, will Penny Mordaunt put the letters in? We've seen Andrea Jenkins, repeatedly rattle her sabre, saying it's time to get those letters in. And then, of course, no, we must be a united party. But as you said, will this be a united party if many of those Tory MPs might be saying, hang on a minute, I don't want an early election?
I think the thing now is it's presented as a fait accompli, which is that you've got 6 weeks, right, we've called the election, we've gone to the monarch, this is what they've said, and then you've just got to fight or die. And so I think it's almost sort of blindsiding the party and push them into the summer election, and we'll wait to see how they do.
Okay, superb. James Hill, the political correspondent at The Spectator, thanks for joining us. Please stick around. And now let's head back to Mark White. Mark, we are moments away, 10 minutes away from this dramatic press conference. Rishi Sunak set to address the nation outside 10 Downing Street.
It's incredible, isn't it, Martin? It has caught Conservative MPs and ministers as much by surprise as it has us, but it seems that's now the direction of travel, that we are looking at a general election announcement and the 4th of July being the date that we're expecting the Prime Minister to confirm in just 10 minutes' time. Now, does this make sense? Listening to Christopher Hope, of course, explaining why in so many ways it just doesn't make sense. But then there is the counter-arguments, the arguments around the small boat crisis, which will only increase as we move into those summer months, with no guarantee that if the Rwanda flights actually get off the ground in early July, as they're planning, that it will make a difference, that it will be the deterrent that Rishi Sunak hopes and expects it will be. And if that's the case, just imagine this scenario, which would be, I think, as damaging for the government as potentially going early. If they get the flights off from Rwanda, and yet there is no deterrent at all, in fact, the opposite, even more people come this summer than did last summer, then that is an absolute and utter disaster for this government, knowing they've done the polling, just like GBNews and other news outlets have done the polling. They know what a big and important issue illegal migration is right across this country, because people in towns and cities right across this country feel it on a daily basis, with key hotels in their areas being requisitioned by the Home Office for asylum seekers. So if the Rwanda scheme, having cost this government close to £500 million, turns out to be an unmitigated disaster, then I think that would be as damaging potentially as the risks of going early.
And Mark, the direction of travel on inflation looks positive. The government target, the Bank of England target, 2%, figures out this morning, 2.3%, nudging closer. And Rishi Sunak, very ebullient, very confident about the fact the plan is working. We are getting the right direction of travel, and pressure on the Bank of England to cut those interest rates so people can start to feel the difference in their pockets. But again, Mark, a lot of people were saying the longer that the economy is given, the more people will feel that difference. So again, it seems counterintuitive, Mark, to call a snap early election in July on the basis of the economy.
Well, it does, but there are never any guarantees, are there? The hope is certainly that going forward things are going to continue to improve, but it's not a guarantee. There is, the potential for the government, and of course they will hammer home this message over the weeks ahead, building up to that election, that look at the direction of travel, look at how things are improving, the sunny uplands ahead, the way in which the visa scheme and the changes that we put into play are making a difference there. Student visas and their dependents coming down, those visas for skilled workers coming down and their dependents as well. Looking at the overall net migration figures coming down, because it's probably got no other way to go, to be honest, given just what a net high it was at 750,000. So the direction of travel there is definitely positive for the government to be able to take that message. And however disheartened and angry Conservative MPs are, understandably probably have been taken by surprise and be given a fait accompli like this. When push comes to shove, they're fighting for their political lives, they're fighting for the party they love. They will be out there and pushing home those very positive messages as hard as they can to the electorate.
And Mark White, early snap elections always carry an unpredictability. They carry a risk. Let's just go back to 2017. Theresa May went to the country early with a 20-point lead in the opinion polls. The Conservatives at the moment 20% down. And of course, we remember the calamity that caused. It was basically a hung parliament, 13 seats lost by Theresa May. Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party putting on 30 seats. We had a supply and demand chaotic situation with the DUP to keep the government afloat. And that was when the Tories were sailing ahead. Snap elections always seem to favour those who just want change, don't they?
They do, but we also remember in 2010 when Gordon Brown was widely seen as dithering over an election date and how that backfired on him as well. Rishi Sunak, OK, he may not be the most charismatic politician, but he's a damn sight more charismatic, I would suggest, than Theresa May ever was. I spent many years covering the Home Office with Theresa May as Home Secretary, and I found her a singularly unimpressive woman. Rishi Sunak, on the other hand, as I say, those that know him, those that speak to him, certainly find him more personable and approachable. So, you know, who knows what he might be able to do. But there is also a risk in not going to the polls because you're also giving the opposition the chance, as the SNP were trying in PMQs today, to say, are you feared? Are you scared, Rishi Sunak? And that will be, in the weeks and months ahead, if we were looking at a later election, increasingly the message that would be sort of levied at the government going forward, that the government is just afraid to go to the polls and face the electorate.
Now, Mark, the phrase damning with faint praise leaps to mind when you say Rishi Sunak has got more personality than Theresa May. Famously, the Maybot with that dancing on stage. Worse even than my dancing, Mark White. That's a separate story, but on a serious point, do you think Rishi Sunak's personality, his likeability with the electorate is there? Long been haunted by rumours of the fact he stabbed Boris in the back. We hear that all the time at GB News. Wasn't put in place by the membership. Do you think this early election could be the final reckoning for Rishi Sunak?
Well, look, compare the two potential leaders here. You've got Sir Keir Starmer, who is not, let's put it this way, widely regarded as being the most charismatic of individuals. And then you've got Rishi Sunak, OK, not perhaps hugely charismatic, but actually quite likeable. When we had Rishi Sunak before the electorate answering questions, largely there was a positive response. When he speaks in public engagements and comes one-to-one with the electorate, they do find him quite personable, quite a decent, well-meaning individual. So, yeah, let's see how he fares in a proper election campaign. It's going to be one hell of a tester for him, that's for sure, but also for Sir Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mark White. Excellent analysis. Now, can we go to Chris Hope? Chris Hope outside Downing Street there. We are moments away, 2 minutes away from that press conference. Chris Hope, over to you.
Martin, hi. Yeah, I'm here in Downing Street, where we are expecting the Prime Minister. The reports are he's going to be calling a July the 4th general election in the pouring rain. So far, we are yet to see the lectern, which is set up for these big moments. If there is no government crest on the lectern, he is calling a general election. That's probably why they've held back the lectern, because when you see the lectern, if there's no crest on it, it means it'll be a party matter, and he's off to see the King to dissolve Parliament. The rumour is that Parliament might be dissolved on May 30th, ahead of July the 4th election. That is a rumour, not confirmed yet, but they are establishing the speakers are now set up for the PM's words. We are yet to see the lectern, so all eyes on Downing Street right now, Martin. There is something quite big about to be announced.
And a lot of disbelief in Conservative ranks. I'll speak to James Heal a moment ago here. His phone was lighting up from messages from Conservative MPs, a sense of disbelief. Chris, a lot of these people are going to be losing their jobs if the Conservatives, as predicted, follows the direction of the travel of all of the polling. So united parties win elections, but this doesn't look like it's going to be a united party.
And that's right, Martin. That is why there is such, I think, surprise in Parliament if he goes ahead and does call the July 4th election. He's not using the time he's got available to him until January the 25th to delay any polling until that point. I suppose he might tell us rather than cling on to office, he wants to take on his detractors and win the round in a short 6 weeks election. But many Tory MPs will tell me they are not ready for this election. They have not got enough leaflets printed. They are not expecting it until November. And many have got holidays booked next week, which is a half-term break in Parliament. Well, that idea, it looks like, is going to be for the birds. It's a full-on election starting imminently. This is not what was expected by many Tory MPs, but Rishi Sunak has kept a team around him very tight. We now look back to the speech he gave at the Policy Exchange think tank last Monday, when he gave a complete tour across the waterfront of policy areas from Rishi Sunak, setting out what he believed in. Last week was bookended by a massive speech by the Prime Minister, setting out what he believes in. And on Friday we had that speech from Jeremy Hunt about why Labour are not saying how they're going to pay for things and will they actually cut taxes or put them up. So that week was bookended by those two big events from the PM and from the Chancellor. And if he does call an election now, we can see what was happening there. That was the build-up, the hors d'oeuvre before the calling of the election.
And Chris Hope, our political correspondent Catherine Forster was with Rishi Sunak in Vienna yesterday. I asked her, how did Rishi seem? She said he seemed very upbeat, very positive. And maybe he knew then, maybe he knew what was coming. Sometimes having to know what's going on gives a certain sense of relief as we await that famous door to swing open, Chris.
That's right, Martin. I mean, it's a surprise that the idea had been this trip to Vienna Monday night into Tuesday, and then they delayed having cabinet, delayed the political cabinet today. But I think no one saw him going earlier. This is a massive gamble if it happens for Mr. Sunak to have an election he didn't need to have in July 4th. He is, of course, showing he's a gambler. He's willing to take risks when required. It's not what we saw would happen. Earlier today, we were marking the return to the House of Commons of Craig Mackinlay, the MP, of course, featuring in a documentary on GBNews last night, who's lost his limbs, arms and legs from contracting sepsis last September. And it was a feeling of an almost end of term feeling in Parliament, and no one saw an election coming. It hasn't been indicated by Mr. Sunak. That's because there's a tight team around him. Many Tory MPs say they're not really talked to enough. No one's aware of it. I mean, a few talk of the early election was triggering letters going in from members of the 1922 Committee of Backbench Tory MPs concerned about an early election would bring their careers as MPs to an unnecessary.
And that's exactly the case.
After the end of those.
That's exactly the case, Chris Hope, because a lot of those MPs, we have a lot of them on this show. They know they're going to be looking at a potential wipeout at a general election. 66 and counting and rising, Chris, won't even be standing at the next general election. But those who will stand and fight, who were looking down the barrel of getting back to Civvy Street, as it were, going back to their ordinary lives, they can't be happy about the prospect of an early general election, can they?
Well, they aren't, because they're so far behind the polls. You go back to 2017, the last kind of surprise election we had then was when Theresa May, as we all say, went up a mountain and came down with an election in a handbag. No one expected it to happen. We were briefed there wouldn't be an election, and then there was one. The Tories then were 20 points ahead of Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party. It looked a slam dunk Tory win, and it was a hung parliament. Now that could well happen again this time, and that's but the other way around this time, because of course the Tories are well behind Labour. They don't need to call the election, so why call it? We're going to hear very shortly from Rishi Sunak if that is the case and they do go for July the 4th, why on earth he's doing it now.
And a hung parliament, Chris.
Again, I would say that we haven't yet seen.
Sorry, a hung parliament, Chris Hope, is something that Rishi Sunak seems to almost be looking forward to as the least worst scenario, not kind of taking a front foot and getting a majority, a whopping 80-seat majority. How long ago does it seem, Chris Hope, since the Conservatives were so far ahead, and now here we are, completely different planet just a few years on?
Yeah, and we had some remarks from the Prime Minister shortly after the local elections, when he kind of said that the Labour's on course to be the biggest party in the next Parliament. He was conceding the premiership to Keir Starmer. Now, when he was challenged on that remark in that press conference 9 days ago, he denied saying it, but he did see there were the clear remarks attributed to the Prime Minister saying that we're on course for a hung Parliament, in which case, again, why go to the country now? And I think that's a question he'll have to answer, not least his own backbenchers, as many journalists, if we get a chance to ask him that question.
Well, he'll be setting out that vision very soon. He's already 5 minutes late. All eyes on that door. It's an astonishing situation, Chris Hope. When we spoke earlier on today, nobody saw this coming in politics today.
I agree, Martin, and we are waiting again for the podium to appear. Now, if that podium appears without the crest of the government on, he is calling a general election. That's what's happening next, or something happening with his own personal life we don't know about yet. If there's a crest on it, there's no election. So that may be why they're delaying doing it. They may also, frankly, be delaying announcing whatever they're announcing at 5 o'clock, because it's still raining. And I think it's not a great look to have a Prime Minister announcing an election under pouring rain. You want to have sunny up plans. You want the sun out, indicating some kind of optimistic future. So I think that may be what's delaying it. They want the weather to pass. It certainly is quite a heavy localised shower here in Westminster at the moment.
And Chris, with all the speculation about there being an earlier general election, could it be something else? Could it be something like Rishi Sunak dramatically standing down as leader?
I don't think it's that, Martin, but it could well be that. I'm sorry, someone's wrapping wires around my legs. So I'm on TV there. I don't think it's that. We are expecting it to be some form of announcement about the election. He could be saying he's delaying it till November, but many people here thinking it is going to be July the 4th election, a summer election. That'll be a relief, I think, for activists. Certainly people and voters don't like having the door knocked in the middle of the night by people asking for their vote. They like it in the summer. There's a general feeling in this country that summer elections are better, and that had been the case until Boris Johnson's landslide victory, an 80-seat majority in 2019. And when that happened, I think the Tories came round to the view that actually we can do winter elections, autumn elections, and that's why so many people were expecting the election then. But we're waiting to see from the Prime Minister. They are now, by my watch, 7 minutes late, and the one thing you know about Rishi Sunak is he's never late.
Well, he is 7 minutes behind schedule at present, and you're absolutely right, Chris Hope. Nobody likes a winter election. I stood as a candidate in that last election, and take it from me, nobody wants to open their doors during the winter months, especially with the cost of heating at the moment. But I'm simply trying to find some logic in this early call. Go ahead.
That's right. I've got a text message here privately from a senior Tory MP. He says 4 things. This is absolute madness.
Wow. This is absolute madness. And that's from a Tory MP within the ranks, and that's the precise conversation that we were having with James Heal a moment ago in the studio here from The Spectator. He said exactly the same thing. Conservative MPs contacting him, saying they cannot believe what's happening today. Loyalists, Rishi Sunak loyalists who were facing down the barrel of losing their seats, nevertheless staying loyal till the end, being handed that grim fate months and months early. Chris Hope, an astonishing thing to happen to them.
It is, and that's why. But maybe this idea of a soft lead for the Labour Party, that's what they're hanging their entire hope on in the Tory party. There's maybe 25% of undecideds who voted in the 2019 election. If they can bring them round and somehow neutralise the Reform Party with its 14 points in the polls, if they can deal with that, they may get towards getting near to where Labour is in the polls. But, I mean, I think looking back to last Thursday, you saw the Labour offering. It was highly lacking any real ambition, any kind of sunny up plans. It was very cautious because they made clear Labour were expecting a November election. So what he's doing here, if he goes for the July polling date, is he's saying, I'm going to use my element of surprise, the one gift I've got as being Prime Minister, which is when to call the general election. And now he's doing it earlier than expected and earlier than many of his party expected. I think the reaction from Tory MPs when we go back to the House of Commons later and meet some of them will be one of amazement if he goes ahead. Right, we have a poll. We have the. Well, we do, as you see behind me, we now have the podium without the government crest on. That means we are hearing an announcement about the party, and that means it looks almost certain we are going to get a July the 4th or a summer general election. That, if you can see over my shoulder, that podium, if it was a government announcement, would have a government crest on. And that is symbolic. They know what that means. They know we all know what it means, and that's why the delay putting out there till they really had to. But that podium, Martin, speaks volumes. It looks like we're heading for a summer general election.
Yeah, no crest on the podium, as you said, Chris Hope. That is a giveaway. This is a party matter, not addressing the nation. We're all set for this announcement, due to happen imminently. We see the press clamouring there, so many, they're blocking the view. All eyes on that Downing Street door now. And as you just said, Chris Hope, a Conservative MP contacted you with that simple 4-word message. This is absolute madness. We have a state of complete disbelief. This is going on, Chris Hope.
No, I think there's going to be an audience of speaking to journalists is going to be talking to his own MPs. I can imagine the 922 committee meeting is meant to be meeting at about now over in the House of Commons. I can't believe they're actually listening to the speakers. They'll be watching GB News right now to find out what on earth their leader is doing. I wouldn't be surprised if later on tonight we have the Prime Minister addressing those MPs, and it could be a difficult meeting for the PM. If he goes with this early general election, as is widely thought now in Westminster, he'll have a lot of explaining to do, because many people were expecting an autumn election. Many Tory MPs are away on holiday next week. They've worked very hard campaigning on the local elections. No one was expecting a July the 4th election, and that will be a big surprise. But he's an individual, Rishi Sunak, who made money in the city. He's used to taking a punt on a bet. He clearly thinks he can do it this time. No one ever saw gamble Rishi, really, until now.
And it's interesting, Chris Hope, how the consequences of this gamble in terms of his personal circumstances for Rishi Sunak may not be as great. He's a self-made millionaire, him and his wife riding higher than the king on the Sunday Times rich list. But the brutal reality of politics, Chris Hope, as you know, many constituency MPs could be looking at a return to Civvy Street, a return to normal life, losing their job as an MP. And as you said, huge breaks in the ranks behind the scenes of Tory MPs who simply cannot believe what is happening.
I think that's a little unfair. Yes, he has wealth mainly through, the bulk of it is through his wife Akshata Murthy, who has a very small stake in the Indian company Infosys. So it's wealth generated mainly by his family. Of course, some wealth made by him through Goldman Sachs and a hedge fund. But I think what he's gambling with isn't really his money, but his reputation here, because by going early, have an election now. Had he gone longer and lost the election, he could then blame it on the nature of elections and the fact he waited as long as he could. And here is the Prime Minister coming now.
Here he is now.
In the last 5 years, our country has fought through the most challenging times since the Second World War. As I stand here as your Prime Minister, I can't help but reflect that my first proper introduction to you was just over 4 years ago. I stood behind one of the podiums, upstairs in the building behind me. I told you that we faced a generation-defining moment and that we as a society would not be judged by some government action, but by the small acts of kindness that we showed one another. You met that challenge, and then some, and I have never been prouder to be British. And when I introduced the furlough scheme, I did so not because I saw a country simply in need of desperate help, albeit we were, but because I saw a country whose future hung in the balance. I could be bold and trust in the tens of millions of you at home that you would rise to the moment, or I could accept the inevitable millions of job losses and pick up the pieces. In truth, it was no choice at all. I have never and will never leave the people of this country to face the darkest of days alone, and you know that because you've seen it. As I did then, I will forever do everything in my power to provide you with the strongest possible protection I can. That is my promise to you. Because for so many of us, it's easy to forget the scale of what we've been through. We were hit by a pandemic that upended normal life. Who would have thought that the government would ever tell us how many times a day we could leave our homes? Then, just as we were recovering from COVID, war returned to Europe, with Putin's invasion of Ukraine sending your energy bills spiralling. I came to office, above all, to restore economic stability. Economic stability is the bedrock of any future success, whether that is rising wages and good jobs, investment in our public services, or the defence of the country. And because of our collective sacrifice and your hard work, we have reached 2 major milestones in delivering that stability, showing that when we work together, anything is possible. Our economy is now growing faster than anyone predicted, outpacing Germany, France and the United States. And this morning it was confirmed that inflation is back to normal. This means that the pressure on prices will ease and mortgage rates will come down. This is proof that the plan and priorities I set out are working. I recognise that it has not always been easy. Some of you will only just be starting to feel the benefits, and for some, it might still be hard when you look at your bank balance. But this hard-earned economic stability was only ever meant to be the beginning. The question now is how, and who do you trust to turn that foundation into a secure future for you, your family, and our country. Now is the moment for Britain to choose its future, to decide whether we want to build on the progress we have made or risk going back to square one with no plan and no certainty. Earlier today, I spoke with His Majesty the King to request the dissolution of Parliament. The King has granted this request, and we will have a general election on the 4th of July. This election will take place at a time when the world is more dangerous than it has been since the end of the Cold War. Putin's Russia is waging a brutal war in Ukraine and will not stop there if he succeeds. That war has also made it all too clear the risk to our energy security. In the Middle East, the forces of Islamist extremism threaten regional and ultimately global stability. These tensions are exploited by extremists who seek to undermine our values and divide our society here at home. China is looking to dominate the 21st century by stealing a lead in technology. And migration is being weaponized by hostile states to threaten the integrity of our borders. And these uncertain times call for a clear plan and bold action to chart a course to a secure future. You must choose in this election who has that plan, who is prepared to take the bold action necessary to secure a better future for our country and our children. Now, I cannot and will not claim that we have got everything right. No government should. But I am proud of what we have achieved together, the bold actions we have taken, and I'm confident about what we can do in the future. We've tackled inflation, controlled debt, cut workers' taxes, and increased the state pension by £900. We've reduced taxes on investment and seized the opportunities of Brexit to make this the best country in the world to grow a business. Put record amounts of funding into our NHS and ensured it is now training the doctors and nurses it needs in the decades to come. We've reformed education, and our children are now the best readers in the Western world. We prioritised energy security and your family finances over environmental dogma in our approach to net zero. We fully funded an increase in defence spending to 2.5% of GDP. We made a decision to invest more in local transport that you actually use, rather than endlessly plough more money into HS2. We set out a comprehensive plan to reform our welfare system, to make it fair for those who pay for it as well as those who need it. Immigration is finally coming down, and we are stopping the boats with our Rwanda partnership. And we will ensure that the next generation grows up smoke-free. I hope that my work since I became Prime Minister shows that we have a plan and are prepared to take bold action necessary for our country to flourish. Now, I've stuck with that plan and always been honest with you about what is needed, even when that's been difficult. Because I'm guided by doing what is right for our country, not what is easy. Now, I can't say the same thing for the Labour Party, because I don't know what they offer. And in truth, I don't think you know either. And that's because they have no plan. There is no bold action. And as a result, the future can only be uncertain with them. On the 5th of July, either Keir Starmer or I will be Prime Minister. He has shown time and time again that he will take the easy way out and do anything to get power. If he was happy to abandon all the promises he made to become Labour leader once he got the job, how can you know that he won't do exactly the same thing if he were to become Prime Minister? If you don't have the conviction to stick to anything you say, if you don't have the courage to tell people what you want to do, and if you don't have a plan, how can you possibly be trusted to lead our country, especially at this most uncertain of times? Over the next few weeks, I will fight for every vote. I will earn your trust, and I will prove to you that only a Conservative government led by me will not put our hard-earned economic stability at risk, can restore pride and confidence in our country, and with a clear plan and bold action, will deliver a secure future for you, your family, and our United Kingdom.
Well, there we have it, the first line there. On the 5th of July, either Keir Starmer or I will be the Prime Minister. Rishi Sunak calling a dramatic snap election, that date now confirmed for the 4th of July. The rain steadily rains down on Downing Street. Rishi Sunak there getting wet, and the sounds of Dee Ream blasting out from the far end of Downing Street. Of course, the anthem of Tony Blair's emphatic victory in 1997. But this isn't a dream. This is happening. Chris Hope, are you still there? OK, we'll come back to the studio. Come back to the studio here and talk to Charlie Rowley, who joins me. You were watching that in real time. You were astonished. You were gasping. You couldn't believe your eyes. We spoke to Chris Hope before Rishi came out, and he said he just had a text from a Conservative MP who said this is absolute madness. But Charlie, it's happening.
It is happening, and yes, I was gripped, I was shocked, like probably most of the country, and that's probably the impact that Number 10 wanted to have after trying to deliver a fiscal event, to try and get people back on side, giving the Conservative Party a second look, where the polls have been stubborn and haven't been narrowing in the way in which I think the government would have liked. Number 10 and the Prime Minister has obviously decided to grab hold of the mantle, call that election, and give people the opportunity now to really focus on both plans, both what the Conservatives will be putting forward, both what Labour will be putting forward, and to make a choice. And I think this dead cat strategy of throwing it out there to the public, which would take, I think, an awful lot of people by surprise, will really now focus the minds.
Is it a dead cat, though, or is it more of a dead duck? Look at the polling. 20 points consistently behind for the past 10 weeks. I spoke to a Labour Party former Labour Party MP earlier who was doing cartwheels at the prospect of an early election. Sir Keir Starmer, of course, has been calling for this moment for many, many months. Rishi Sunak didn't have to do this. Why on earth do you think he has?
I think because there's clearly a worry and a fear that the public aren't listening, and so you've got to make them listen. And the only way you can do that is by having an election and setting out your choices and setting out your policies. For what it's worth, I personally would have thought it would go beyond the summer to see that Rwanda policy take flight, to allow the Prime Minister then to go to the country to say, look, whatever you think about the Rwanda policy, I've delivered. The economy is getting better. We've had great figures out again today. We had growth in the economy announced last week. So things are getting better. And I think the longer that they was able to have a narrative to say that things are going to get better and continue to get better, so now stick with Rishi Sunak and the Conservatives and don't put that at risk, I think would have been my personal advice. But there's obviously other things that have gone on around the table in terms of conversations, and the Prime Minister's decided, look, actually, the public don't want this dragging out over the summer. I'm going to allow them to make that very clear choice. They've got to hear from the Labour Party, which they haven't heard from. They don't know what they stand for. But he's got a record which he's clearly proud of, which he was articulating there, and he hopes that the country will return him to office, as you say, on the 5th of July.
OK, Charlie Rowley, former advisor to Michael Gove, please stick with us for more reaction. If you're just joining us, the dramatic news: Rishi Sunak has finally put an end to speculation and called a snap general election on July the 4th. Britain will head to the polls on July the 4th. And I can now cross to Chris Hope outside Downing Street. Chris, astonishing, and yet here we are, it's happening.
Yeah, well, the cabinet is now breaking up from a decision which will go down as the biggest political gamble taken by a sitting Prime Minister in recent history. This is a party which is 20 points behind the polls, and yet despite that, the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, rather than wait for that to recover with better economic data, maybe by September, with a tax-cutting budget in September, with better figures on net migration. Pardon me. Alistair Jack, are you OK about the election? Very good. As Alistair Jack, the Scottish Secretary, says very good to me about the election being called. As I'm speaking, Martin, the Cabinet are leaving, so do excuse me for leaning over my shoulder and shouting at people, but that's what I do for a living. That was Alistair Jack, he's the Scottish Secretary. He said very good chances of winning the election. Well, the polls don't think so. The polls think the party is 20 points, 25 points behind the polls, behind Labour. The Reform was on 14 points. An election now, it is as I say, it's the biggest, I think, gamble taken by a sitting Prime Minister I can remember. And I've been around. Let's ask some questions. Lucian, are you going to win the election? There we are, four female cabinet ministers leading. No answers there from any of them. Just smiling. I bet they're in some form of shock because many of us are in the media. We weren't expecting an election to be called before the autumn. Rishi Sunak has gone earlier. He didn't have to go, but he's calling an early election. He thinks he can, on the promise of what he's doing and delivered so far, on that promise, he can then indicate if he is re-elected as Prime Minister.
And Charlie, we'll come back to you in the studio here. We're struggling there with the connection to Chris. Rishi Sunak talked about some of his achievements during office in the last 5 years. He said it's the most challenging times we've faced since World War II. We faced a generation-defining moment in the COVID lockdown. But he said, I had never been prouder to be British. I saw a country whose future hung in the balance, and I will never leave people of this country to face difficulty alone. He talked about the furlough scheme, about paying Britons during that difficult time. He talked about Ukraine. He talked about economic stability. He talked about who do you trust, and that we'll hear a lot of that in the coming few weeks. Who do you trust? Now is the moment to choose your future. And that moment, he said, on July the 5th, either Sir Keir Starmer or I will be the Prime Minister. But do you think anybody will be listening to that detail of the past? Are all eyes on the future?
Well, if they haven't heard of it or aren't prepared to listen to it, they certainly will have to over the next 6 weeks, because that's exactly what the message that Number 10 will be putting out, the message that Prime Minister will be taking to the country. And he will, as we heard during that speech, frame the choice, a very clear choice between him and Sir Keir Starmer. And what Rishi Sunak has done in office as Chancellor, as you absolutely rightly said, so delivering the furlough scheme during the COVID crisis. And whatever your views about COVID, it had to be dealt with. There had to be schemes in place that cost a lot of money. But he's dealt with that as Chancellor. He's then come in as Prime Minister in a more uncertain world than what we've ever been in the past, with the war in Ukraine, with the threats of China, the threats of Iran, the threats of Russia. And so, you know, defence spending is up. These are all things that I think people will have to hear and will listen to as to what kind of country and what kind of world we live in. And so who is the best person to lead this country through those difficult challenges into the future? Is it his record that he's proud of, clearly proud of, and I think he's right to be proud of? Do the people want to continue with Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister, or Sir Keir Starmer, where people just don't know what he stands for?
OK, thank you very much, Charlie. And now let's get the opinion of the political commentator, Matthew Stadlen, who joins me now. Matthew, this is a move that's taken everybody in Downing Street by surprise. Our political editor, Chris Hope, was stood outside Downing Street and he received a text message moments before that announcement from a Tory MP who said, "This is absolute madness," and yet it's happening. And Rishi Sunak himself said, on the 5th of July, either Keir Starmer or myself will be Prime Minister. What's your take on this dramatic day?
I'm so surprised. I'm not even wearing a tie, Martin. Honestly, I always thought that this election would not come before October. I didn't think that Rishi Sunak would be prepared to be a under 2-year Prime Minister. I really did think that that sort of personal milestone would matter to him. I think the reason he's called it now is primarily because there is a little bit of good economic news, although how much credit Sunak himself can take for inflation coming down, well, that's very much up for debate. You could argue that it's for the Bank of England to take some credit. It's not just the economic news, though. We've seen, haven't we, and indeed I was on your channel just a few days ago talking about the record numbers of people coming across to this country on the small boats and the small boat crossings on the Channel. Unbelievable when you think at the beginning of last year, Sunak made that one of his 5 pledges. And I think he's absolutely terrified, Martin, of a summer of small boat crossings. And coupled with that, my strong suspicion that as well as being cruel, the Rwanda policy would prove to be totally useless and failing. So he's got a bit of good news. He's got to try and seize that momentum. And I think that's why he's called it now. I would just say, though, and I don't know whether viewers will agree, to me, it looked rushed. The optics were not good. He was almost drowned out, as you were saying earlier, by the famous anthem that welcomed Tony Blair's New Labour to Downing Street in 1997, "Things can only get better." And his jacket, as you saw by the end of it, was soaked through. So he was being rained on from a great height. So I'm not sure how effective this is. And certainly the polls, although you might argue have slightly narrowed, 1 or 2 of them in recent days, the polls have been dead against him now for month after month after month.
You know, you're exactly right. Mark White, our Homeland Security editor, said the same thing, Matthew, and that is, as sure as night follows day, when the Channel, the Dover Straits are calmer, those boats are guaranteed to increase. So that's one possible piece of logic for calling an earlier election. But all of the smart money, Matthew, as you said, was on a later election to give the economy time to kick in, to show that inflation could get below that 2% margin, to see some of those interest rates kicking in so people could actually feel a bit better off in their pounds and pence in their pockets, playing the longer economic game. That hasn't happened, and this seems to have taken everybody by surprise.
And he claimed in that speech at the election, at the lectern there, that it was some sort of victory, the fact that we were growing. I mean, the idea that this tiny fractional growth that has pulled us out of what was actually a recession, the idea that that is something worth celebrating, let alone basing a general election on earlier than many of us, if not all of us, were predicting, seems to me quite extraordinary. I mean, if you think 20 years ago that this tiny margin of growth would be seen as a victory, I think people would have said you're a bit bonkers. So I'm not sure that he's got very strong foundations at all. I mean, which of his 5 pledges that he made early in January of last year and said that we should judge him on, we the British people should judge him on, which of those pledges have been an emphatic success? Just think of the NHS waiting lists, millions of people languishing on those waiting lists. That has a massive knock-on impact on people's mental well-being as well as their physical well-being, on what their families feel, on their ability to work and so forth. Think of those small boat crossings, and whatever you think of the Rwanda policy, and the country is split on that, I I don't think anyone wants people to be making those dangerous journeys, and those have been going up this year. So in crucial ways, I think Sunak has failed. And I think one of the big questions that Labour will be asking as we near this election, just weeks away now, and by the way, but for many of us, it is exciting, especially for sort of political broadcasters and presenters. This is a great moment. And actually, not just for presenters and broadcasters. I mean, my WhatsApp groups, not just my political WhatsApp groups, but my social WhatsApp groups today have been buzzing with this speculation. And I do wonder whether there is a general feeling, I think, around the country that the time has come. I mean, you remember that famous quote from that lady from, I think, Gloucestershire, when Theresa May called that early election, she said, not another one. That at that point, people were sick of elections. Now, I think a sizable proportion of the population will be absolutely desperate for this chance to go to the polls. And the key, just to come to this point, a key question I think that Keir Starmer will and certainly should be asking as we approach this election is, has your life got better since 2019? Indeed, has your life got better since 2010? Because these Tories, initially with a bit of help from the Lib Dems, have been in power for an astonishing 14 years. And I suspect, of course, people will still turn out and vote Tory, but I suspect the majority of people will say, no, my life has not got better. If you look at policing, if you look at crime generally, if you look at the prisons being overcrowded, if you look, as I said, at the NHS, you remember when Boris Johnson, for goodness sake, who was Prime Minister when we last went to the polls, it feels like a long time ago, he stood on the steps of Downing Street and said that he had a plan for social care. Has social care been fixed? Does anyone really believe that? Is our transport system affordable? I mean, these are the questions that I think Labour need to be hitting the Tories hard with.
OK, Matthew Sadler, you didn't have time to put a tie on, but you certainly had enough time to prepare an epic monologue. Thank you very much for joining us on the show. Always a delight to have your opinion. And, of course, the King has granted the Prime Minister's request to dissolve Parliament. And let's speak now to GB News' royal correspondent, Cameron Walker, who joins us from Buckingham Palace. Cameron, massively dramatic moment. And, of course, that involved earlier on today Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, visiting the King to dissolve Parliament. Tell us more.
Absolutely, Martin. The King has had an incredibly busy diary today, but he's had to find time in his diary to carry out one of his most important constitutional duties. He spoke to the Prime Minister, as the Prime Minister confirmed in Downing Street earlier today, and the Prime Minister asked his permission to hold a general election and dissolve Parliament. The King has granted that permission, and as the Prime Minister confirms, that general election will take place on July 4th. Every seat in the House of Commons is now vacant. Any bill that the King has not already given royal assent to will not become law in this parliamentary session, and dissolving Parliament remains one of the King's royal prerogative. But the King will only dissolve Parliament on the advice of the Prime Minister. That is what has been confirmed today in Downing Street. And the general election, of course, as I said, will be held on the 4th of July. But that is an issue for the King, potentially, because 4th of July falls within Holyrood Week, or in other words, Royal Week, where the King is in Scotland, in Edinburgh, taking part in the traditional week of royal engagements there. On the 2nd of July, he's due to hold a garden party at the Palace of Holyrood in Edinburgh. So in theory, this does mean that the King is going to have to cut short his week in Edinburgh to potentially come back down to London, ready for the day after the general election on July 5th, to appoint the Prime Minister following that election. Now, of course, usually that does happen in the building behind me in Buckingham Palace, and that is where the King appointed Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister. The time before that, it was the late Queen Elizabeth II appointing Liz Truss, and due to health reasons, that appointment happened at Balmoral in September 2022. But usually that would happen in Buckingham Palace, which makes me think that the King's diary is going to have to be shifted around somewhat. But as it stands, the King has granted the Prime Minister of this country to hold a general election on July 4th and dissolve Parliament.
Thank you, Cameron Walker, for that update live at a very wet-looking Buckingham Palace. Now, if you're joining us on GB News, it is 5:37 and a dramatic afternoon. We can announce that the general election has been called by Rishi Sunak. The date will be July the 4th, and the Prime Minister a while ago said on Downing Street on the 5th of July, either Sir Keir Starmer or I will be the next Prime Minister. And we've just heard a press conference is due at about 4:45 in about 8 or 9 minutes' time from Sir Keir Starmer. We'll hear from the Labour leader shortly. But let's come back to the studio now. I'm still joined by Charlie Rowley, former special advisor to Michael Gove. Again, just want to repeat the fact your phone has been going mad. There must be a sense of huge disbelief from within the Conservative ranks.
It split people. I mean, it really has. You know, people thought, and the money, as you said earlier on, the smart money was on an autumn election. So it's taken people by surprise, because I think people were planning a nice summer holiday as well. So the question that I think people will want to know, and what will come out in the next few days, is has this been rushed? It was what Matthew was saying earlier on, Matthew Stedman, that because, you know, as I say, people have planned a summer holiday, it's taken people by surprise. And I think, you know, you've got to bring the party with you, I think, as well as the public. So Theresa May called an early election when she said she wasn't going to. And I think the question for her, when she was 20 points ahead in the polls, that the country wanted to answer is, do we know Theresa enough? Do we want to give her the opportunity to elect her as Prime Minister? Because she came in on the back of David Cameron resigning. So the question to the public is, do we know Rishi Sunak enough? Has he been Prime Minister long enough for him to win over that trust? But then, of course, that question equally applies to Sir Keir Starmer. He's been leader of the opposition for 4 years, 5 years, and people still don't know what he stands for, and flip-flops all over the place. So it really will be a question for the country as to who do they trust more, because they don't see a plan under Sir Keir Starmer. They've had a taste of Rishi, and he's got a record that he was obviously articulating there that he thinks is going to be enough to get him over the line, and it's shaken up the country on the 4th of July.
And that talismanic 2-year term date would have been October the 24th. That's when Rishi Sunak was made the leader of the party. Do you think he's ever really sort of gelled with the voters in terms of approval ratings? Sir Keir Starmer his personal opinion polls for the next Prime Minister are way ahead. It's about 34% to 19%. Although, interestingly, the preferred candidate is the don't know. The kind of who should we have as the next Prime Minister? But that choice looks now like a binary choice between Sir Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak. Rishi spoke a lot about his achievements over the last few years. But do you think anybody was really listening to that now? Or is it a case of, buckle up, here we go?
Well, I think they're going to hear a lot more about it over the next few weeks. And I think, look, you're right. It's that sort of undecided voter category that I think the Conservatives are probably sort of banking on. Because if you haven't decided that you're not going to vote Conservative now, if you haven't decided that you're definitely going to vote Labour, then those votes might still all be to play for. And I think given the shock and the snap calling of the general election means that actually people really do have to focus their minds. They really do have to engage in the political process. If they haven't been over the last few years, because it's just been about internal Conservative Party fighting, they've now got a real choice whether it's Rishi Sunak or Sir Keir Starmer.
You've been an advisor to Michael Gove. How do you turn that Conservative apathy into action? We've seen at recent by-elections a huge stay-away Conservative vote. We had electoral calculus in the studio during that wave of last by-elections and council elections, and generally there's a fall away to those who are simply staying at home. They're not voting for anybody. An equal fall away to the Reform Party. Sir Keir Starmer might be delighted about the Reform Party now, because it may take away Conservative Party and pave the way to Downing Street for him. We're due to hear from Sir Keir Starmer in about 5 minutes' time. But how do you turn that electorate, the apathy, the activists themselves who are saying they feel very, very crestfallen? How do the Tory party get their vote out?
Well, I think the first thing to stress is that now that the election's been called, the one thing that the Tory party can do is come together quite quickly, even after, some of the issues that we've had in the past.
They seem more divided than ever.
But we've got an election now on the 4th of July. We're going to go for it, and everybody will come together. Everybody will get behind the Prime Minister, because it is going to happen. So we've got to get the message out there. And the answer to your question in terms of dealing with voter apathy is communications. This is a short campaign now, 6 weeks, 7 weeks to go, I think. And it's got to be about the clear communication. So, you've got someone who's got a record record that the Prime Minister has stood on, that he's articulated there at the steps of Downing Street, the choice will be very, very clear. If you want a Labour Party that's going to offer nationalised railways, nationalised energy, nationalisation in the waterways, in any other ways, that means more spending, more taxes, more debt, and more a burden on your cost of living. Now, that will be the dividing lines that the Tory party put forward. You'll hear that time and time again, and a Labour Party that will wreck the economy, take the country back to square one, versus Rishi Sunak, that's been the Chancellor, that under his Prime Ministership has steered us through that economic turbulence, that's got growth in the economy, that's got inflation down. That's the choice that the people will have to make, who they want to see taking this country forward.
But a lot of Conservative voters have even been saying they think nationalising the railway is a good idea because it's been terrible under private ownership. Look at the sewage issues we have with water companies. There's a feeling in the country that nothing works, that everything is broken. And does that favour, we're about to hear from Sir Keir Starmer in a press conference very, very soon. Do you think at certain times we just reach a point of wear out? 14 years is that natural long cycle. We've seen it before with the Labour Party. That was their term before the Conservatives came in. Or are we just at the point where people are like saying, do you know what? Nothing works. Let's just have some change.
Well, it's a shame that that narrative has been allowed to fester, and it has. And look, election strategists at CCHQ have always said that the next election will always be a tough one. There'll be a lot of work to do to win those people back, to win those voters back over. But I still think while there does exist that category that we were talking about of undecided voters, whilst they're still to play for, there is a chance that people actually, when push comes to shove, when they've actually got to go to the ballot box and they've got to put their decision in a political party, the faith in a government who they want them to serve, it will be a very, very clear choice.
Okay, now going to the leader of the Labour Party, Sir Keir Starmer.
Thank you. Tonight, the Prime Minister has finally announced the next general election, a moment the country needs and has been waiting for, and where, by the force of our democracy, power returns to you. A chance to change for the better your future, your community, your country. Now, it will feel like a long campaign, I'm sure of that. But no matter what else is said and done, that opportunity for change is what this election is about. Over the course of the last 4 years, we've changed the Labour Party, returned it once more to the service of working people. All we ask now, humbly, is to do exactly the same for our country and return Britain to the service of working people. To that purpose, we offer 3 reasons why you should change Britain with Labour. 1, because we will stop the chaos. Look around our country. The sewage in our rivers, people waiting on trolleys in A&E, crime virtually unpunished, mortgages and food prices through the roof. It's all, every bit of it, a direct result of the Tory chaos in Westminster. Time and again, they pursue their own interests rather than tackling the issues that affect your family. And if they get another 5 years, they will feel entitled to carry on exactly as they are. Nothing will change. A vote for Labour is a vote for stability, economic and political. A politics that treads more lightly on all our lives. A vote to stop the chaos. 2, because it's time for change. Our offer is to reset both our economy and our politics so that they once again serve the interests of working people. We totally reject the Tory view that economic strength is somehow gifted from those at the top. Over the past 14 years, through all the crises we've had to face, sticking with that idea has left our country exposed, insecure, and unable to unlock the potential of every community. But a vote for Labour is a vote to turn the page on all that. A vote for change. And finally, 3, because we have a long-term plan to rebuild Britain. A plan that is ready to go fully costed and fully funded. We can deliver economic stability, cut the NHS waiting times, secure our borders with a new border security command, harness great British energy to cut your bills for good, tackle antisocial behaviour, and get the teachers we need in your children's classroom. But most importantly of all, we do all this with a new spirit of service. Country first, party second. A rejection of the gesture politics you will see in this campaign, I have no doubt, from the Tories and the SNP. I'm well aware of the cynicism people hold towards politicians at the moment. But I came into politics late, having served our country as leader of the Crown Prosecution Service. And I helped the police service in Northern Ireland to gain the consent of all communities. Service of our country is the reason and the only reason why I am standing here now asking for your vote. And I believe with patience, determination, and that commitment to service, there is so much pride and potential we can unlock across our country. So here it is, the future of the country in your hands. On the 4th of July, you have the choice. And together, we can stop the chaos, we can turn the page, we can start to rebuild Britain and change our country. Thank you.
That was Sir Keir Starmer addressing the nation there. He said, the future of the country is in your hands. The moment the country needs the opportunity for change is here, of course, reacting to that dramatic announcement from Rishi Sunak a short while ago, about 45 minutes ago, calling a 4th of July snap early election. I'm joined in the studio by a very sodden Chris Hope. You've been outside at Downing Street there. Rishi Sunak standing in the drizzle. The ream was blasting out from the far end of Downing Street. And you said the most dramatic political gamble you can ever remember.
Yeah, and I'm pretty old, Martin. I can't think of a bigger gamble taken by a sitting Prime Minister ever. They are 25 points behind in the polls. It's the kind of thing you do if you're ahead in a poll, not if you're behind. Why isn't he waiting until something better happens, until all the things we discussed earlier, net migration comes down to 2019 levels, illegal migration starts to ease with the Rwanda plan starting to work, possibly, maybe 2 cuts in interest rates to erase the memory of Liz Truss, ticking up a growing economy. All these areas he hasn't taken advantage of. He's gone early. He could have gone as late as January 2025. He hasn't. He's called to July the 4th election. He's soaking wet. I'm soaking wet. That shouldn't matter to anybody, but he looks wet. You have a very crisp, clean Sir Keir Starmer there, setting out his plans, looking like he's ready for this announcement. And let me tell you, we weren't in Westminster. No one thought this was coming until about 2 o'clock today when the rumour mill went into overdrive. It is surprising. It is the biggest gamble he has taken, but he's a gambling man. He worked in the city. He takes punts and risks on shares. He's done one on his own party's future, and it might backfire.
Because he's also taken a huge gamble on a lot of Conservative MPs who are looking at the certainty of losing their seats. Before Rishi spoke, you read out a text that you'd been sent by a Conservative MP saying this is absolute madness. Have you heard anything else?
The same MP, very, very senior backbench Tory MP, this is absolute madness. I said, what's the logic? He says there isn't any, and the launch was a farce. I said, is the PM going to talk to you guys? He should be doing an address to the 22 committee of backbench Tory MPs, which normally meets at 5 o'clock tonight. Is that happening? Graham Brady won't tell me. You'd expect he would do to get them all off, because the election, let me tell you, starts tomorrow. The campaigning starts tomorrow. I have no idea, he says, and I couldn't care less when I said, is the PM going to speak to you? I said to him, this is the biggest political gamble taken by a sitting PM in decades. He added, who owns an estate in California.
Wow, so there's already huge division within the party. We speak all the time about united parties win general elections. 5 minutes after the election, the speech today, beg your pardon, this sounds like anything but a united Conservative Party.
It feels chaotic. Now, let's give them a break here. We didn't know about it, so it's confused us a bit in the media and amongst Tory MPs, amongst the key team around the PM. Clearly, they know what's going on, but they weren't briefing it to anybody else or even indicating an election was coming. He's used the one big bazooka he's got in his arsenal, which is a surprise election, to surprise everybody. The surprise is caused because it's an election based on promise. He's saying, vote for me and things will get better, not things will only get better, is what you heard being played from the Speaker from protesters. He's saying, vote for me, don't risk it. China, Russia, our enemies are on the march, be careful. Don't risk it on Labour, he's saying, and don't risk it with things getting better. Don't risk it on other people behind Keir Starmer who you may not think are good with the economy.
Do you think therein, Charlie Rowley, lies a huge rub? Project Fear. Things going to get worse. We saw that with Brexit. People aren't motivated to turn out to keep somebody out of power who might be worse. They want optimism. They do want change. And OK, it's not 1997. With £2.6 trillion in national debt, Blair came in with a huge chequebook. He could make things happen. It's a very different time, thanks to the pandemic and the war in Ukraine. But will things going to get worse under Sir Keir Starmer land, or are people bored of this negative politics?
Well, I think, look, everybody wants to run a positive campaign. Everybody should be running on a platform of hope and optimism and on a good enough record. And I think it goes back to perhaps even 2010, actually, you know, where David Cameron sort of ran a campaign that was sort of, getting Gordon Brown out. He tanked the pound, he'd sold off the gold, the economy was in crisis. It's time for change. But at the very end of the 2010 campaign, I think it was, or the 2015 campaign may have been, there was that flurry of hope and optimism. And I think we'll see that perhaps in this campaign as well. There'll be lots of risk. Don't put the economy at risk. Don't allow a party to come in that doesn't commit to defence spending when you've got those threats against Russia, China, Iran, all of the areas that the Prime Minister set out there. Don't put it all at risk. But at the end of the campaign, there'll be that this is the hope and this is the offer and this is why you should stick with Rishi because of all the other things that he wants to do and wants to achieve.
October the 25th was that talismanic 2-year date of Rishi being Prime Minister. A lot of people, certainly who get in touch with us here at GB News, have never really forgiven Rishi Sunak for what they see as stabbing Boris Johnson in the back. Do you think this now could be the day of reckoning, not only the biggest gamble of Rishi Sunak's personal political career, but of the Conservative Party's career? A lot of people will be looking at this and thinking, well, why should I vote for you?
Well, I think that's right, and I think, look, there was speculation in a few newspapers not so long ago that Boris will join the campaign or he'll have a part to play in the campaign.
Do you think he will?
I think he will. I hope he does, and I hope, look, if everyone who is a Conservative, recognises the challenge that the election will be because of the difficulties, not just in terms of internal party politics of chopping and changing leader, but the difficult decisions that have had to be taken. We've had to take difficult decisions, and so you would hope that everybody can come together, including the former Prime Ministers, whether it's Theresa, whether it's Boris, to come back to the fold, to sort of be out on the doorsteps, as I'm sure they will, have a part to play in the campaign, to remind everybody whether you voted Conservative and why you voted Conservative in 2010, in 2015, in 2017 and 2019, when we as a party won that whole majority, that stonking majority, that 80-seat majority. Then there is a reason again, after the pandemic, after dealing with Brexit, after dealing with the war in Ukraine and energy bills and all the rest of it, there is still a reason to vote Conservatives because we've got the plan to take this country forward.
And that 80-seat majority, Chris Hope, now seems like a lifetime ago. To think back, the then and the now of where we're at, and yet we are putting into action now a Conservative Party that feels divided, it feels fractured. Talk me through, is there any possibility whatsoever of a leadership challenge now, of a backlash? Is it technically feasible for letters to go into the 1922 committee to demand Rishi stands down, or now Parliament's dissolved, is that moment past?
I think Parliament is dissolved on May the 30th by the King. That gives you some days before, while MPs are still MPs, not candidates in the election, to try and remove their leader using the parliamentary process. I think that ship has probably sailed. There was a real threat, I think. It was mooted when the idea of an early election was mooted early in the summer before the local elections, but I can't see it taking place now, Martin. These MPs are swiftly going to become candidates. Many had holidays booked next week. Many felt they'd worked really hard into the local election, did all they could to save their colleagues, local colleagues in their constituency's skin, despite the national poor showing of the party. And now they're being forced to fight for their political careers when few were expecting it. I think, as I say, it's the biggest...
The latest GB News travel.
Good evening, my name is Johnny Ratner with your very latest travel news. There are long queues heading west of Edinburgh on the M8 this evening, where one lane remains closed just after Hermiston Gate Junction 1 at the scene of an accident that's now on the hard shoulder, with debris still being cleared off the carriageway. Long queues back onto the Edinburgh City bypass. The M6 in Greater Manchester is blocked northbound at Junction 23, the Haydock exit, where a van and a car have collided. Long queues all the way back to the M62. And on the M5 in the West Midlands, the inside lane shut northbound at the M6 interchange for emergency repair works. Following an accident, queues back to the Frankley services. In Northamptonshire, the A510 Wellingborough Road at Findon's blocked for accident investigation work. The A40 is closed in West London, heading out of town at Gypsy Corner because of an ongoing incident. And on London Underground, severe delays on the Piccadilly line out of Arnos Grove to Cockfosters, Heathrow Airport and Uxbridge. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
It's the biggest cash prize we've given away to date. An incredible £20,000 that you could use however you like. And because it's totally tax-free, every single penny will be in your bank account to do whatever you like with. £20,000 in tax-free cash really could...
older than him, but does he want to be an MP? And if he goes all in with reform, that could eat away even more the Tories' a deficit to Labour. They're 21 points behind the polls, according to Ipsos. That could extend even worse if Farage goes for it. We don't know the answer. We'll know imminently.
Well, he's going to be sat in this seat where I am in 2 hours'
that's
time.
Well, asking the question for you.
So maybe we might find out. Maybe Nigel Farage might drop a real surprise on us and let us know his instincts, his plans at 8 o'clock. But before that, Charlie Rowley, to quickly sum up before we hand over to the Michelle Dewberry show. She starts in about a minute and 15 seconds' time. A hugely dramatic day, and the Conservative Party will be left reeling.
Very dramatic, and just as Chris was saying there, now the Conservative Party has to find even more candidates. It would have there was a trickle of MPs always resigning, always stepping down at the next election. I'm sure a lot more would have announced it over the summer. They can either do that now. So the party has to find more candidates. It has to get its campaign in order, and it has to go to the country in the next 6-7 weeks to make its case to re-elect Rishi Sunak.
So if you're joining us on the show, a hugely dramatic day in politics. Rishi Sunak, around about 45 minutes ago, announced there will be a snap general election on July the 4th. He said on July the 5th, either Sir Keir Starmer or I will be the next Prime Minister. He talked about having the conviction to stick with the plan. Sir Keir Starmer gave a press conference about 45 minutes ago. He said, now is the time for change. The time is upon us to change our country. It's the moment the country needs. A hugely dramatic day in Westminster. Thanks to Chris Hope. Thanks to Charlie Rowley. Now I'm handing over to Michelle Dewberry. It's Dubes & Co. from 6 till 7. Thanks for joining me on the Martin Daubney Show. See you tomorrow.
It's 6 o'clock and I'm Michelle Dewberry. Breaking news, everybody. The speculation is over. It is now official. We have ourselves a date